hereby call this meeting of the Norwood City Council order. Please rise for the prayer and pledge of allegiance. Our Father, who art in heaven, as a body we congregate in this council chambers. We pray for thy divine guidance that we may do all things well according to thy holy will. Amen. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Williams, please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Here.
Mr. Gabbard?
Here.
Mr. Geraci?
Here.
Mr. Kelch?
Here.
Mr. DiNardo?
Here.
Mr. Thompson?
Here.
Mr. Braden?
We have 6 members present this evening, 1 absent. Moving on to item E, amendment of agenda. This evening, we have a change to item L7, the ordinance amending Chapter 1321 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances to allow murals in certain areas of the city of Norwood. B, we are adding item L8. L8 is the ordinance authorizing the mayor or safety service director to purchase an ambulance with upgraded patient care compartment with air filtration and sterilization capabilities necessary to mitigate exposure of coronavirus and other airborne diseases and declaring an emergency. Also, we are adding item L9, that is the ordinance authorizing the mayor or safety service director to, forgive me, I'm reading the same one. Here it is. Ordinance authorizing the mayor, safety service director to. Ordinance making a special exception for full-time unclassified appointed employees with more than 4 years of continuous service to the city of Norwood for unused sick leave benefits. That's L9.
So that is not in replacement of, that's in addition to.
That's a new, it's a different language.
Yep.
That
Could
was
you
from,
repeat that? I'm sorry, I had trouble hearing you.
That's different language.
The part before that.
The L9,
Okay, L9.
yes, sir. And if I'm not mistaken, that's everything. May I have a motion?
Did you want to add this email,
I'm sorry.
request this email be added? Zoom on. All right.
May I have a motion to,
We move, we amend the agenda.
thank you, Mr. Thompson. May I have a second? Mr. Dracy.
Second the motion.
Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. Did you say that one of the amendments of the agenda was going to be to change the version of the mural ordinance B?
Yes, that's the
Yeah.
one received from the law department.
Okay, no, that's, I appreciate that. So I am going to be voting against this amendment today. The versions of this ordinance that have been circulated in the community, in the versions that people had for ordinance B, it included neighborhood business district in it, which is a business district. And this ordinance, the version that we have today, does not include neighborhood business district. And so I don't know if the community has had a chance to react to that. I would rather us vote on the ordinance B that we were given in our packets and that was circulated to the community.
You're referring to L7, Mr. Bonzo?
Yes, that's correct.
Any other discussion? Mr. Dracy?
I'll save it.
So what you're asking for, Mr. Bonzo, is not to,
Well, no, I'm just asking, I'm just saying I'm going to vote no on the amendment. And then if the amendment if the amendment to the agenda fails, we can make another one that might be more narrow that would pass.
anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
No.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present, we have 5 yes, 1 no. Motion passes. Brings us to item G. Item G is the public hearing. The Planning Commission's recommendation on the amendment to the PUD ordinance.
minutes.
And we're missing the minutes amendment of that.
Did I skip right over it? Forgive me. Got ahead of myself. Item F, minutes of previous meeting. Amended July 28th, 2020. May I have a motion? Mr. Geraci.
Make a motion to accept.
Motion by Mr. Geraci. May I have a second? Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Sorry, Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson? I've got a sheet here that's got the old council members' names, so I was confused for a moment. My apologies. Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, motion passes. Now moving on to item G, public hearing. I hereby call this public hearing to order. Public hearing, the Norwood City Council will hold a public hearing to consider Planning Commission's recommendation on an amendment to the PUD ordinance. The applicant made an oral request to add residential apartments and townhouses as an allowable use. PLK is submitting a preliminary plan unit development plan for the property known as 4590 Beach Street, Norwood, Ohio, 45212, Hamilton County Auditor Book 651, page 0019, parcel 0125K, Playing Card Partners, located within a light manufacturing M1 zoning district with PUD overlay. Notice is hereby given that on the 22nd day of September 2020 at 7:30 PM, a public hearing will be held on the Planning Commission's recommended approval of the Playing Card Partners preliminary PUD plan applications. Such a hearing will be held in the Norwood Community Center, 1810 Cortland Avenue, Norwood, Ohio, 45212, on the bottom floor. Do I have anyone that would like to come forward and speak in favor?
Good evening, Pastor Sonny James, 1830 Hopkins Avenue, Norwood, Ohio. Just want to say that a lot of work has obviously gone in to such a project as this. One of the things that I'm very excited about personally is the level of transparency, the level of openness and diversity, and the focus on diversity. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity to really embrace as a community. I think it's something that we as a community need to at least bridge the gap and be open to real live things that are coming to our community that can make a difference. And listen, folks, for the history of Norwood, you're never going to get 100%. But where you have transparency, from my perspective, you have a tremendous opportunity for such growth for everybody. So I encourage all of the residents of Norwood to really take a strong consideration of where this project and others like it could really take our community in terms of unification and helping us bridge the gap where we might be a little bit short. So I just want to commend all the work that's gone in and really appreciate the effort. No matter what side people are on, we at least need to recognize folks and give them their props when they put a lot of faithful hard work into it, just like many of you do, trying to serve this city. So that's it, unless there are any questions.
Thank you, Pastor James. Anyone else that would like to speak in favor of the PUD? Anyone that would like to speak against the PUD, please come forward, state your name.
Hi, my name is Ashley Creech. I have a little speech, so I guess I'll start that. I live at 2240 Norwood Avenue, but I spent 20 years growing up on Kenilworth. And I'm here to share my story that relates to many Norwood residents. My family moved here when I was 3. My dad, a union painter who used to work here in Norwood at E.B. Miller until they closed their doors. My mom, a caretaker for children and now for special needs adults, both being and coming from a long line of blue-collar workers. My parents bought their forever home and quickly fell in love with the community, as did I. Tragically, when I was 8, my brother was in a very severe car accident. Both of his legs and his back were broken. He had to have many surgeries and was paralyzed for 1 year. Rods were put in his back and his legs. During that time, my mom quit her job to take care of him. At that point, we were a one-income family. The expenses of raising a family of 5 and doctor bills got to be too much, and my family had to go bankrupt. In that bankruptcy, we lost our home. Luckily, an old neighbor had a 4-bedroom apartment available just 2 houses down. My parents didn't qualify for any housing assistance because my dad made too much money. As a union painter, a man with no college degree, no paid time off, and could only work if work was available. Meaning, in slow winter months, his hours were either significantly cut or he was laid off. But he made too much money. We were raised in the Norwood City Schools. Even with all of this, we did not qualify for free or reduced lunch. To put that in perspective, over half of the Norwood kids in 2019 were on free or reduced lunch. Just knowing the hardships my family had, I can't imagine what these families are facing. I share this story to highlight the need for affordable housing. My parents had an opportunity to still live in Norwood, but the opportunity for many residents is quickly vanishing. When their forever home sold 2 years ago for over $200,000, it was clear that my parents will never be able to afford the house they once owned, even though they are both working now and have no kids to raise. Personally, I lived at a 1-bedroom apartment on Kenilworth across the street from Doro Field. I paid $550 a month. It was a nice, basic 1-bedroom, but had no central air. That exact same apartment now rents for $925 a month. Still with no central air, just minor cosmetic upgrades. Residents are being forced out so unnecessary cosmetic renovations can be done. Then they can no longer afford the rent that has now doubled. Norwood has always been affordable. Now it's nearly impossible to find a reasonably priced house to own or an apartment to rent. Right now, there's only 26 housing locations in the city that provide affordability, are low income, or provide assistance. 47% of Norwood renters are overburdened. That brings me to the current issue with the U.S. playing card development. I participated in their office hours for the specific purpose of affordable housing. I was advised that the cheapest for a 1-bedroom would be $900 a month. Majority of Norwood residents are already priced out at that price, and that is the lowest and the smallest apartment. The median income for a Norwood family is $42,000. There is no reason why Norwood housing prices should be on par or sometimes more than Oakley, whose median income is $67,000, $25,000 more than ours. Also in the meeting, Nick, who is in charge of PKL, told me that when they say this is being built for Norwood, they mean they want the community to feel welcomed, which to me it's odd that we would need to feel welcomed in our own community. At that point, it was clear that we would not be able to afford to live there, and we wouldn't be able to afford to live in our community. I think people are very quick to forget that this community was built by the blue-collar working class. However, they are the people being forgotten with nothing in place to help them. Affordable housing needs to be a priority, not just for this development, but for all future developments. Studies have shown that when affordable housing is placed throughout a city with different incomes, there is a decrease in crime and property values actually increase. The hard part is changing people's perception of the words affordable housing. I have before emailed some council members of a PDF of ways to keep and maintain affordable housing, one being tax abatements for developments who have affordable housing. Norwood has once already turned their back on their residents for development in the name of urban renewal with the Rookwood Exchange. We cannot let that happen again. We cannot vote yes until affordable housing is a priority. Norwood does not need high-end apartments or townhomes. We need affordable places to live. We need council to stand with us and not make the decision just for potential rich, but for those who long-term residents who call Norwood home. It shouldn't be a privilege to afford to live or feel welcomed in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Creech. Anyone else that would like to speak against PUD? Anyone? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I hereby close this public hearing. Moving on to item H, requests to address council. I have several requests to address council this evening. When I call your name, please come forward, state your name, your address. I'll remind you, you have 5 minutes. I will start the timer once you state your name and address. First, this evening, we have Dan Galligan.
My name is Dan Galligan, 4773 Poplar Street. I want to come here and address council because I don't feel that even at this point, the murals of what's happening is being, the information's being relayed out. I really feel like I went up and down my street and I talked about it and they were completely clueless. Most of my neighbors aren't connected on Facebook. They aren't connected on the internet. And if they don't have Spectrum cable, they can't get the community television. So the information's not getting out there to them. And as I walked up and down my street, I realized that really we don't hear from our council person, and we really don't feel like we're getting information done. So I would like to address that. I think council, if you could reach out to the people you represent, set your feelings aside and represent the people that elected you, brought you out here, and listened to us. I can tell you now that majority of the people that I spoke to on my street was not for the murals in residential neighborhoods. But when they found out about it, they're completely clueless. Now, most of them are elderly and unable to attend these meetings. So I would encourage council to not just your neighbors, not just your friends, but reach out to the neighborhoods that you don't go to and get their opinions. Find out what they really want, because you're actually here for us and not for your own benefits. Now, I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but I think that it should be part of your job to go out and reach out to people and say, hey, how do you really feel about these murals? Do you really want them? These are the different things. We didn't even know what kind of ordinance are being put out there. In fact, to this point, I don't even know fully what the ordinances are other than I hear them read. I would like to see it, if there's a way to get a hold of those put out there to where somebody could actually, or maybe the council person could go around to a neighborhood and say, hey, I'm going to be over here at this particular time. I'm going to read out the ordinance and explain it to them. That would be great. Something, I really feel like council could, and I know you have a tough job. I understand that. And this has been a very, very tough project to work on. And I greatly appreciate all the work that's gone into it. But I really feel like it's lacking in the information area. And I would encourage council to step out and step down the neighborhoods you don't go down and reach out to the neighbors. It's a beautiful day. It's a good day for a walk. That's all I really had to say. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. Next request is Elizabeth Hatchett.
Hi again. I'm Elizabeth Hatchett, 1757 Weir Avenue. So it's my understanding that the difference between the two ordinances that you all are going to review is the inclusion or the exclusion of commercial corner store properties. And I just wanted to say, I think before we know whether corner store businesses should have a right to a mural, we first have to give a definitive answer to the question of whether we actually want businesses in our neighborhood. When council passed the ordinance that allowed conditional commercial use of historic corner store properties 7 years ago, the vote was unanimous. Folks at that meeting commented about how this would be an incentive to resurrect distressed properties, buildings that drag down the value of homes within eyeshot, and really within our whole neighborhood because they're usually on thoroughfares. Buildings that aren't renovated by developers because they are considered high risk, requiring a niche audience of buyers. You would think, after watching that council meeting, that Norwood was completely supportive and excited for entrepreneurs to restore and inhabit these 35 properties throughout our city. Yet, the two businesses that have gained conditional commercial use have endured significant resistance. To those of you in leadership who support restoring these properties and filling them with independently owned, high-quality, family-friendly businesses, how can you invite others who aren't yet on board to join you? And to those of you who aren't so sure these current and future businesses within the neighborhood deserve your support, what is your plan for seeing these dilapidated, high-risk buildings throughout our city restored? If we can agree that we want quality businesses to thrive within the neighborhood, there are many ways to support them, but we're here to talk about murals. When historic commercial spaces were filled with businesses during Norwood's heyday, they enjoyed a few key physical features that helped them get noticed. First, they were built abutting the sidewalk. This positioning forward naturally gave these buildings a prominent sidewall that was often used for advertising. Today, these ghost signs are sometimes kept for their nostalgic character in historic neighborhoods. And I think in a society that is now inundated with all kinds of advertisements, we can probably agree that we don't want new ads in our neighborhood. But these painted signs not only communicated specific information, they were an immediate visual cue that further differentiated the building from its surroundings. A mural, while completely different from an advertisement, can also be a visual cue that sets a business apart. A potential mural was a reason we bought and began to restore our building. However, as I've mentioned many, many times in public and private, I care more about peace with my concerned neighbors than I do a mural. This doesn't change the fact that our building has a very prominent wall that feels barren to me. And this is one reason why I started to research vertical gardens that could at least offer beauty during warmer months after my neighbors voiced their concerns about murals. The owners of the other operational corner store property, True Freedom Yoga, have expressed interest in a future mural as well. Recently, a neighbor who regularly passes their building told me they had no idea there was a yoga studio there, despite their signage. A mural would be a tool to gain greater visual presence, contributing to their business's success. Do we care about the success of current and future businesses within our neighborhood? The question still needs to be answered definitively by leadership. If the answer is no, or we're not sure, please just say that and save current and future entrepreneurs precious time and money. If the answer is yes, please legislate in a way that enables those businesses to thrive and encourages other entrepreneurs to take risks on distressed buildings in our community. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Hashik. Next request to address council, Meg Albers.
Hi, I'm Meg Albers. I live at 1810 Hopkins Avenue. I've been a Norwood resident for over 5 years. A special interest group is trying to push for an ordinance to allow anyone to paint murals and graffiti in the city of Norwood. This means anyone, not just trained artists. My concern is that there's no way for the city to control content per the U.S. Supreme Court freedom of speech law. This means that residents can paint whatever they want, whether it is offensive or not. Pretty much anything goes. During a time where the country is so divided and people are home angry and frustrated because of COVID-19, there is a very good chance that if allowed, people will take their frustrations out via painted murals and graffiti. We as homeowners and residents need to step up and protect our city, our homes, and our investments because this will potentially affect our property values, and the city won't be able to legally do anything to prevent someone from painting something that you might not like or agree with. We are asking council to keep murals and graffiti out of residential zones. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Albers. Next request to address council, Adam Walterman.
Hello, my name's Adam Walterman. I live at 1802 Hopkins Avenue, just a few houses down from what Ms. Hatchett was saying, her property. Basically, I'm just here to speak tonight on behalf of living on the street, understanding Norwood as a whole and neighborhood, and I just kind of want to address some of my concerns with the decision of murals in residential neighborhoods. When I decided to purchase my property, it's a multifamily property, it's an investment for me. Something I look at in residential properties is, property values. We can say all day that, something could change, but we really don't know. Could go down, could go up, frankly. It's just something I don't want to gamble with. Investment property is a huge deal. I'm just really not interested in seeing a mural 4 or 5 houses down from myself, possibly not getting tenants from that, things of that nature. I know my neighbors and myself have had the same concerns. Pretty much everybody on our entire block has the same house. It's just something that I don't want to see every day, frankly. I just don't want to go home every day. I work in an urban area currently. I work in marketing. I totally understand advertising, marketing, everything. I just don't want to come home to look at another mural or art piece. It's just something, frankly, I don't want to see. I'd love to see it on Montgomery Road. Definitely kind of pick up from there, put some great art projects there, but as far as the residential property, it's just something I'm not interested in seeing in my neighborhood. Another big thing I just kind of want to bring up that I noted, we were talking about advertising before, Ms. Hatchett was, and that it would bring more, noticeable things to the neighborhood, but previously she said it, she didn't want to draw too much attention, but definitely driving up a mural on Hopkins Avenue is going to distract drivers that are already driving 45 miles an hour in a 25 mile per hour zone. So I can only imagine what drivers would see once coming upon the yellow building with a huge mural. It's honestly a safety risk. We have kids in our neighborhood now. I plan to have kids sometime in the future, live in that property. It's just something that could be very distracting. So definitely like for you all to take consideration into that. There's just multiple risks in residential zones, and I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next request to address council, Joe Creech.
Good evening. Joe Creech. I reside at 5110 Hunter Avenue. I come to council tonight to speak out against murals. Given the city's history of issues with dilapidated properties, both residential and business, I see enforcing and maintaining the upkeep of murals becoming an issue for the city. I see it inviting graffiti, an issue that we've had with vacant buildings and current occupied buildings in the city that have gone untreated until property owners have either bought the property and cleaned up the graffiti. Some have still left graffiti on their building. I think murals will invite the tag artist who love to add their own to anything, whether it be a blank slate or a slate that's already painted on. I think it'll have a negative outcome for property value in the city. If somebody should paint something derogatory or unpleasant to the eye, I think it'll, ultimately impact future of the city with possible lawsuits if we deny a mural to go up for one reason or another. Get into a issue of freedom of speech, expression. We already have a problem retaining businesses. I don't see throwing money and efforts to maintain a mural, to enforce, the upkeep of the property, benefiting the city on retaining business or drawing new business in. I think we have more efforts in other areas that we need to look into long before we consider murals. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, Tom. You state your name and address, please. You have 5 minutes.
Hi, my name is Tom Toohey, and I live at 1833 Cortland Avenue. And I have to get this real quick. Okay. Excuse me. I spent half the time trying to find this now. Okay, I'm a 20-year resident homeowner of Norwood, so I'm neither young nor, quote, a newer resident attempting to disrupt our way of life. The concept of public art, mainly murals in this case, is just us catching up with the rest of the world. As you know, the city of Cincinnati has developed a world-class curated mural program, like so many other cities across the country. In part because of the development of parks, entertainment venues, public art, much like that of U.S. playing cards project. These calculated moves have greatly increased the residency tax base and helped restore the vitality of the city. There are no rebel flag murals downtown Cincinnati, simply great works of art. I'm not suggesting we replicate their program, but if there is a template, why not use it? Cincinnati has successfully navigated this process, and we can learn from them, avoiding certain pitfalls while further making Norwood a better place to live and enjoy. Murals create stimulating thought, conversation, contemplation, and the opportunity for enlightenment. Murals can provide a much-needed cultural and educational enhancement for our community. I cannot emphasize enough the positive impact a well-thought-out mural ordinance or program can provide for our community. Murals do not have to be a huge offensive entity. We are within our rights as a community to set certain standards by which any artistic submission would have to abide. When I apply for an art show, there are almost always restrictions as to what is accepted and what is not. You do not follow the rules, you do not get in. It's that simple. No reason city guidelines could not be included in amended ordinances which prohibit advertising and offensive imagery. I am not suggesting every blank wall adorn a picture. However, some areas seem logical and prime for this embellishment. One of the lost gems of Norwood are our beloved old corner stores scattered about. Unique to our neighborhood, these places could help provide a wonderful, unparalleled character with the potential of becoming an important branding tool for the future of our city. Even for just a small facelift would help. And fundraising is another issue that I don't think anyone's talked about. Financing murals can be expensive, and maintaining them can be expensive, but there are ways, and there's plenty of cities that are doing this. So it's another creative process. There are grants for urban development available through HUD. Various arts organizations have money aside for potential projects that someone needs to look into, we can all look into. And there'll be personal donors that if we can get the excitement built, that people will back things like this. So fundraisers and grant writers need to be called into service. On a lighter note, I had to laugh when I heard it suggested that you do not see murals in vibrant and successful communities, seeing how I just personally completed one in Indian Hill last week. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next request to address council, Kristen James.
Good evening. I'm Kirsten James of 1830 Hopkins Avenue in Norwood. I'm here just to give you an update regarding Elevations Enrichment, better known as Elevations After School Enrichment Program here in Norwood. We are currently we haven't been able to do the drive-in that we had discussed with you all yet. However, we are still working on that. We are currently and recently been working up to it with socially distanced outdoor movies with our group. Our next one is coming up this Friday. We have also been recently developing a relationship with some Xavier staff and students via Pastor James's Hearing Every Perspective as well. So just wanted to give you all an update with everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Next request to address council, Pastor Sonny James.
Pastor Sonny James, 1830 Hopkins Avenue. I want to be very, first of all, respectful of the lives of those that have come way before me. It's not a matter of any particular race or creed. It's a matter of character and those that have fought for the rights and privileges that I hold true today. And so we recently laid to rest Supreme Court Justice who put her life on display and was bold enough just in her stance to encourage people like myself and many, many people all over the country. And so I want to first just acknowledge her for her service. With that being said, I really want to make sure that the residents of Norwood hears my heart. You see, when we come together, we have to realize that we are all mentors, and we literally shape the minds of people who follow us. And one of the things that we've got to understand is we have got to give honor to whom honor is due. We have got to embrace one another no matter what political group you're with. no matter what special interest you've connected yourself with. I live in Ward 1, and a lot of folk think that I probably would have a problem with Mr. Kelch, who is the community advocate for that ward. Couldn't be further from the truth. Mr. Kelch has come into this political arena and has really displayed an open mindset towards diversity. And I just want to embrace and piggyback. When we come together, let us please stop having fear of our peers. For instance, we have this big juicy clock in front of us. And recently I stood before you and a council member said, wow, he's talked for 10 whole minutes. With all of you able to see this clock, the residents able to see this clock, and then for him to say, he spoke for 10 minutes, and now we've got to hear more. And for me to look at all of you awesome individuals, but yet not one publicly would have the heart or the drive or the whatever to stand up and say, hey, we don't operate like that here anymore. That when we have youth that are looking at us and looking to us, that is why economic inclusion is so very important. This has got to become one of your top campaigns, declaring an emergency. Sure, we put up Black Lives Matter signs in our yards. Some people do. But we need more than that. We need voices from the mayor to the brand new resident in town. I personally think it's awesome when we don't agree. But I think it's even more awesome when, like Mr. Gabbard and I, can sit across from the table and he can boldly say, well, Pastor, I might not say I agree, but at the end of the day, we can shake hands or now elbow pump. It is that type of leadership that we need. And in 2015, I drafted a 13-point plan addressing how to move our community forward. And I pray with the help of some of our new council and some of you, get on board. Let's sit down and let's meet together. Let's make a difference. Don't be afraid to say the word black. Don't be afraid to say, I haven't treated somebody fairly. Don't be afraid to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Be bold enough. Be courageous enough. Because I'm not going anywhere, whether you like me or not. But when I make a mistake, I want to say I'm sorry. And that's all I expect of you. Economic inclusion. God bless you all. And I barely made it.
Thank you, Pastor James. Mrs. Creech, I know you filled out a request to address council.
Oh, no, I just meant it for that. Sorry.
Okay, just wanted to double check. Thank you very much. That concludes our request to address council. Moving on to item I, reports of standing committees of council. I-1, Parks, Recreation, and Public Spaces Committee meeting report. Mr. Kelch.
Thank you, Mr. President. So there's two reports here from 8/26/2020 to the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio. The Your Committee of Parks, Recreation, and Public Spaces, to whom it was referred. This is our standing committee meeting. We heard from Ms. Leslie Stevenson, ASAP Norwood, Ms. Donna Lake, also from ASAP, Ms. Kate Wetzel and Lauren Bartosik from ASAP about the park audit tool and how that was coming along. Our second item, we gave an update on Leestown Memorial Park. The progress is ongoing. The equipment is being installed. We're waiting the plaque for the park dedication ceremony, which we want to hold in early to mid-October. Also, there was a $27,000 grant awarded to the city of Norwood, and we're planning to use that at Hunter Park. 9/15/2020 To an honorable council of the city of Norwood, Ohio, we, your Committee of Parks, Recreation, and Public Spaces, to whom it was referred, our standing committee meeting. We heard from Ms. Leslie Stevenson about Waterworks basketball courts. They're open. There's a sweepstakes. The closing date was 9/20/2020. The park audit is underway in Norwood, currently rating our parks so we can put them together in a list of priority to repair them. Linder Park, there's work days going on Fridays in October, and that's going from 5 to 8 p.m. down at Linder Park. Show up, bring some tools, and help out. Third item, we went over the Hunter Park renovation survey results, which we received 229 responses. And that project's going to be phased over both this year of 2020 and next year of 2021, early into 2021. Lastly, we heard from Ms. Dana Bowl about the Adopt a Park program. She would like to do something along the Wasson Way in Norwood. And we also heard from Ms. Dana Bowl about Keep Norwood Cool program. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. May I have a motion to accept the committee reports of 8:26 and 9:15? Mr. DiNardo?
Motion to accept the column.
Motion by Mr. DeMauro. You have a second. Mr. Tracy?
Second the motion.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Moving on to item I2, Economic Development Committee Meeting Report. Mr. Gabbard.
Dated 9/15/20 to the Honorable Council, City of Norwood, Ohio. We, your economic development, to whom was referred digital signs and mural ordinance, beg leave to support the following report. I will be contacting Ken from Exposure to invite him to the Committee of a Whole for more in-depth questions and presentation. We, as far as the murals, we had a more defined definition of murals. We cleaned up some language regarding public and school properties and made changes to the Arts Board ordinance. Respectfully submitted, Michael Gabbard, Chairman, Mr. Eric DiNardo, Mr. Eric Thompson, and Mr. James Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. May I have a motion to accept the committee report? Mr. DiNardo? Motion by Mr. DiNardo, second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, motion passes. Moving on to J, third reading of ordinances and resolutions. J1, resolution declaring intent to sell unneeded or surplus firearms and related equipment by internet auction during calendar year 2020 and declaring an emergency. Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move we have the third reading of the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonsall to have the third reading. You have a second, Mr. DiNardo? Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have the third reading?
Resolution declaring intent to sell unneeded or surplus firearms and related equipment by internet auction during calendar year 2020 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. May I have a motion? Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonsall to pass the ordinance, second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, motion passes. Moving on to item K, second reading of ordinances, resolutions. Item K1, ordinance confirming the unused sick leave benefit to all full-time unclassified employees with more than 4 years of continuous service with the city of Norwood, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Gabbard.
I'd like to make a motion that we table this ordinance until a date determined later.
We have a motion by Mr. Gabbard to table the ordinance to a time undeclared. Mr. Geraci,
I'll second that.
second by Mr. Geraci. Discussion? Mr. Thompson?
I would like a question to the mayor, if he'd like to explain why we're tabling this one and coming with another one later on.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. There's verbiage within this one that I felt was not necessary and could potentially be a challenge for the city later in the future. So that is why there was one put on later on that sort of removes that from the ordinance.
Mr. Thompson?
Follow up to the law director, do you concur that the language that was removed from the original ordinance cleaned it up and/or made it better?
Mr. Moore?
The language that was changed is in the whereas clauses, and I understand the mayor's perspective on stating the intent in a different way. The operative language of the actual legal effect of the ordinance does not change.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. DiNardo?
That was my question.
That answered your question?
Yep, we're sweet.
Thank you, sir. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item L, introductory readings of ordinances and resolutions. L1, ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2020 and declaring an emergency. Mr. DiNardo?
I have a motion to have all three readings.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to have all three readings. May I have a second? Mr. Thompson?
Second.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion?
Yeah, I can.
Mr. DiNardo?
While you would have seen, you didn't see in your packet, but you would have seen Exhibit A on your table in front of you. This is to appropriate into the fund the additional resources that we received. And I think we're going to see later on the agenda, a move to utilize those funds towards the purchase of the ambulance that we'll talk about later. But they're independent of each other, and this is just to increase, to match the additional funding that we received.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo.
If you have any more questions, I can go into.
Any further questions?
Yeah, just further clarify where the funds came from.
This is part of the CARES Act.
I just meant for the people who might be listening and not understanding.
Where?
The CARES Act.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have all three readings?
Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2020 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2020 and declaring an emergency. Ordinance to change appropriations for the year 2020 and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. May I have a motion? Mr. DiNardo?
Motion we take a vote, pass this?
Thank you. May I have a second? Mr. Geraci?
Second.
Second by Mr. Geraci. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item L2. Ordinance adopting the recommendation of the Planning Commission to amend ordinances 2014 to allow for residential use at this planned unit development overlay zone at parcel number 651-0019-0125, owned by Playing Card Partners, LLC. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we have all three readings of this ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonsall to have all three readings. Mr. Gabbard.
Second the motion.
Second by Mr. Gabbard. Any discussion? Mr. Bonsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. So the reason why we need to do all three readings is because there is a timeline for approvals that have to get made. We had to wait, nearly 45 days from the time the Planning Commission approved it, just because of timelines with publications and then also requirements in the Ohio Revised Code for these things. So we've had the PLK has come to multiple council meetings since then and has answered questions. They've been available. They've had the community office hours. I think they've been extremely transparent about what they are looking to do. And so, in this specifically, this ordinance specifically is to allow the residential use, but then in general, the two ordinances that we're approving tonight, they're for the site plan. So it's essentially just approving just preliminarily that we're okay with locations and kind of positions of buildings, but it's not approving any of the final architecture, it's not approving building materials, it's not approving anything like that. So that's why I made the motion to do the three readings for this ordinance, so that we can move along.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. Braden? Oh, I apologize.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. May we have all three readings? Mrs. Williams.
Ordinance adopting the recommendation of the Planning Commission to amend Ordinance 2-2014 to allow for residential use at this planned unit development overlay zone at parcel number 651-0019-0125, owned by Playing Card Partners, LLC. Ordinance adopting the recommendation of the Planning Commission to amend Ordinance 2-2014 to allow for residential use at this planned unit development overlay zone at parcel number 651-0019-0125, owned by Playing Card Partners, LLC. Ordinance adopting the recommendation of the Planning Commission to amend Ordinance 2-2014 to allow for residential use at this planned unit development overlay zone at parcel number 651-0019-0125, owned by Playing Card Partners, LLC.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. May I have a motion? Mr. Bonzel?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we pass this ordinance.
Mr. Gabbard?
Second the motion.
Motion by Mr. Bonzel, second by Mr. Gabbard. Any discussion?
Have a discussion, please.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yeah. I wanted to speak in particular to Ashley Creech. Did I get that right? Yeah. I'm going to be voting in support of this, but I would like to explain why. For me, over the course of I think it's been like 5 meetings that I've had hearing from PLK, they made particular note of the income potential, and even on a conservative basis, I felt that income potential was very high. And so while I really understand the need for Norwood to address the affordability of housing for our residents, I felt that I need to separate that from the commercial, office, and retail space that will exist. And the housing is almost the math that PLK needs to bring us the income potential. So I just wanted to explain why I'm going to be voting it. And I can appreciate your feelings, but for me, I separated those two because of that.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. DeRacy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Moving on to item L3, ordinance approving the preliminary planned unit development plan for the real property owned by Playing Card Partners known as 4590 Beach Street, County Auditor's Book 651, page 0019, parcel 0125, located within a light manufacturing M1 zone district with a PUD overlay and declaring an emergency. Mr. Bonson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we have all three readings of this ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonzel to have all three readings. Mr. Gabbard.
I second the motion.
Second by Mr. Gabbard. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. DeRacy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. May we have all three readings, Mrs. Williams?
Ordinance approving the preliminary planned unit development plan for real property owned by Playing Card Partners known as 4590 Beach Street, County Auditor's Book 651, page 19, parcel 125, located within a light manufacturing M1 zone district with a PUD overlay and declaring an emergency. Ordinance approving the preliminary planned unit development plan for real property owned by Playing Card Partners, known as 4590 Beach Street, County Auditor's Book 651, page 19, parcel 125, located within a light manufacturing zone district with a PUD overlay and declaring an emergency. Ordinance approving the preliminary planned unit development plan for real property owned by Playing Card Partners, known as 4590 Beach Street, County Auditor's Book 651, page 19, parcel 125, located within a light manufacturing M1 zone district with a PUD overlay and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. May I have a motion, please? Mr. Gabbard.
Motion to pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Gabbard. May I have a second? Mr. Bonzel. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. DeRacy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present, the motion passes. Moving on to item L4, ordinance establishing the Norwood Arts Board. Mr. Thompson.
Move we have the first reading of this ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Thompson to have the first reading of this ordinance. May I have a second? Mr. Bonzel? Second by Mr. Bonzel. Any discussion?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Any discussion? Mr. Bonzel?
Yeah, I would just comment that, right now, we're currently working on the stairs here in the room, so when people walk on it, it's louder than it normally is, so, reason for the delay there, but it's great to see those improvements.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzel. Any discussion? Mr. Dracy?
As far as this, I think really this is the only time that I've read through this one. Mainly because there's been other things going on surrounding this, and I don't want to say that it's been clustered to discombobulate everybody from everything that's going on around this. But I guess the only thing that I really see I have a question on in this one is the 16502, where it says relevant experience. That seems to be a very umbrella or balloon term, very vague term. How do we verify that somebody on this board has the relevant experience to be on this board? That's the only one that I really have just kind of casting through it.
Thank you, Mr. Geraci. Mr. Thompson?
I believe the way we've got this set up is it's an appointed board, appointed by the mayor, so the mayor will be the one who determines whether someone has the necessary qualifications to be on the board. I personally plan to submit a couple of names and resumes that might be interested in doing this for you to look at. I would just suggest that anybody who's either interested in serving on this board or know somebody who might want to serve on this board to get in touch with us, and we can make sure that, you know, that we can pass the information on.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Geraci?
Guess I will ask another question then. How is this any different than going through like the Economic Development Committee? And why do we need this if they have really no power to do anything other than just say, yeah, I like that. No, I don't like that. No, you're not going to get by with that.
Thank you, Mr. Geraci. Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Mr. President. So I know that the fact that this is coming at this exact moment definitely kind of clouds the arts board in the sense that, you know, it makes it appear like the only reason why they're here is because of murals. But as we did talk about in the Economic Development Committee, there's actually more than just murals that they're going to be doing. You know, their job in general is just to help, you know, promote public and private cooperate, like basically support of the arts. So trying to potentially give council or the administration, you know, they can meet and talk and give ideas for ways to improve, I guess, art in Norwood, you know. And I think specifically what I would probably envision is that they would probably look at public places in Norwood that the city owns, like of where we could have art, not just murals, maybe it could be a statue, it could be other things, but yes, one part of their duties is, you know, in item 165.03H, members of the board shall review mural applications under codified ordinance 1321.15 and may provide suggestions to the applicant on a purely advisory basis. That's just one item of, you know, 4 or 5 other items that are kind of their duties. I see this kind of similar to like the Norwood Tree Board in that sense that the tree board doesn't necessarily have a lot of duties, but there's just, in general, just to promote like green space in Norwood. And the tree boards in the past has gone out to help get grants and other things, and I can see the arts board kind of acting in a similar way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Mr. DiNardo?
Yeah, that was very well said. The only add-on that I would say to James's point is that when in the Economic Development Committee, we also talked about the advisory board or the advisory function to help guide in a positive way. So if someone came and they wanted to do sunflowers on the side of the building, the advisory board might say, oh, actually, this city did it and they used this color or this type of paint and it worked well. So that advice could actually improve an application that was already going to go through. Again, like you said, they can't tell you not to do something. They're only going to say you're already going to do it anyway. But I imagine it's going to be filled with appointments that have experience in that exact thing. And so it could maybe provide advice to an applicant that may not already have it.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Mr. Geraci?
Still skimming through this, I guess, while everybody's talking, and I'm taking everybody's comments in here. I don't see anywhere in here that there is sort of a set meet time or a, you know, this board will meet once a month. How is this board going to be doing the meetings or?
Mr. Gabriel, I saw your hand up, sir.
This will be on whenever someone submits the application for a permit, then they would do that through the building department. The building department would then tell them that they'll need to go to the art board, at which point they'll call a meeting and do it like that. There's, you know, we have no idea how much interest there'll be, so it's just based on you know, when someone submits.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Any other questions? Any further discussion? Mrs. Williams? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr.
I was
Bonsall.
gonna say, I would love to just say one more item here. So 165.04 is the review of board decisions by council. So basically, it just says council shall have the right to review any conduct, acts, and decisions of the Norwood Arts Board. So if there is something, like some kind of concern that, a council member might have with something that the Arts Board does, or the council as a whole, nothing they do is binding in the sense that council can't override it. And so I just want to make sure that's known too, that there are kind of like protections in there as well, to ensure that the legislative body, the council, still has kind of the ultimate call.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may I have the first reading?
Ordinance establishing the Norwood Arts Board.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Moving on to item L5. Resolution declaring it to be the desire of council that Halloween trick-or-treat be celebrated on Saturday, October 31st, 2020, between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 p.m., and recommending that masks be worn, that social distancing be practiced, and that hand washing or sanitizing be done. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we have all three readings of the resolution with the first reading in its entirety.
Motion by Mr. Bonzo to have all three readings, first reading in its entirety. May I have a second? Mr. Thompson.
Second.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I think we all know that trick-or-treating is a hot topic out there. I know that I've received many inquiries about this. Mr. Gabbard and I talked earlier this week. I know that he's received inquiries. I think the mayor's office probably has as well. And so the goal behind the three readings is just to kind of let this be known. So, even if somebody does want to vote, against the ordinance for their reasons, I do think that we should go ahead and just do all three readings. That way we can just let people know and there can be some certainty on kind of where we're heading in that direction and not just have the cloud. Because, everybody, I think people recognize too that whether we pass this or not, like there's going to be trick-or-treating on Halloween. It's going to happen. But this has been a tradition that I think we've done and many cities in Ohio do, passing the resolution declaring the official time. So I do think that we should support that. Go ahead and set that.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Any further discussion? Mr.
And-
Nardo?
I don't think it was mentioned that there's a paragraph in there that talks about safety, and I did kind of talk to two police officers in a different city that are facing this, their council is facing this exact thing, just to kind of, hey, what are you guys doing, sort of thing. And they both independently spoke about how this is actually a safer move because it's going to happen anyway. Making it a fixed time and having people talk about it in a very specific and intentional way actually helps residents, potentially police, if there are elements that they feel they need to be enforced. Just having that clearly established actually helps our community. So that just got a little feedback from another city, and that seemed to be what they're doing to do. So,
Thank you, Mr.
if
DiNardo.
it matters.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Mrs. Williams, will we have the first reading in its entirety and the second and third by caption, please?
A resolution declaring it to be the desire of council that Halloween trick-or-treating be celebrated on Saturday, October 31st, 2020, between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 p.m., and recommending that masks be worn, that social distancing be practiced, and that hand washing or sanitizing be done. Whereas the mayor of the city of Norwood and the Norwood Police Division have determined that Halloween trick-or-treat should be celebrated between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. on Saturday, October 31st, 2020. And whereas the United States Centers for Disease Control, in response to the presence and spread of COVID-19 throughout the United States of America, including the city of Norwood, recommends that masks covering the wearer's nose, mouth, and chin be worn, that a social distance between people of at least 6 feet be maintained, and that careful hand washing with soap and water or hand sanitizing be practiced to prevent the spread of the virus. And whereas the safety of children trick-or-treating, of their adult chaperones, and of the Norwood residents distributing treats is of paramount importance, now therefore, be it resolved by the Council of the City of Norwood, State of Ohio, Section 1, that it is the desire of council that Halloween trick-or-treat be celebrated between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. on Saturday, October 31st, 2020. That the council recommends that children trick-or-treating, their adult chaperones, and residents distributing treats wear masks covering their noses, mouths, and chins, maintain a social distance of at least 6 feet from other people, and wash their hands with soap and water, or otherwise sanitize their hands as frequently as practicable, to mitigate the risk of exposure and spread of COVID-19, as recommended by the United States Centers for Disease Control. That a copy of this resolution be posted in accordance with Section 731.25 of the Ohio Revised Code, and that copies be distributed to all news media within the area. A resolution declaring it to be the desire of council that Halloween trick-or-treat be celebrated on Saturday, October 31st, 2020, between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 p.m., and recommending that masks be worn, that social distancing be practiced, and that hand washing be sanitized or sanitizing be done. A resolution declaring it to be the desire of council that Halloween trick-or-treat be celebrated on Saturday, October 31st, 2020, between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 p.m., and recommending that masks be worn, that social distancing be practiced, and that hand washing or sanitizing be done.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we pass the resolution.
Motion by Mr. Bonzo to pass the resolution. Mr. DiNardo? Second. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. All right.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Moving on to item L6, ordinance amending Chapter 1321 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances to allow murals in certain areas of the city of Norwood, A. Mr. Dracy.
Before we get into these ordinances, I would like to request permission from council to read at least 2 letters that I received, on top of all the other letters that I've received. I would only like to read 2, but I will submit the rest of them to the clerk.
We have a motion from Mr. Geraci to read 2 letters and submit the rest to the clerk. Second by Mr. Kelch. Any discussion? Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, I mean, I've got here, 11 letters myself, 7 or 8 are pro, and then there's 3 that are against, having murals. And so, I mean, I'm fine reading them, but I don't know how fair it is to read some people's letters and not read everybody's letters that took the time to write to council.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Anyone else? Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present, voting aye, the motion passes. Mr. Geraci?
First one's going to be from Marilyn Hanrahan, 2257 Monroe Avenue. I am writing instead of speaking at council due to COVID-19. I would like to start by saying I love art, and I am not against murals in general. I am against what I am against with no oversight, rules, regulations for content. We are aware content conditions cannot be placed on murals, except for a few exceptions. Once murals are approved by the city, almost any content will be permitted. While debating this on council floor last year, one council member stated that the community takes it upon themselves to make sure that the murals are tasteful and artistically sound. The question is, how? It would be illegal to censor. There is no way to control most content. Many residents still believe the proposed Norwood Art Board will have no authority to approve content. They will not have any such authority. Can we trust that the people would use good taste in designing or painting a mural? Should we trust that people would not paint a mural like an erect penis or monumental vagina mural that had been memorialized in New York? No, we cannot. The recent mural proposal presented to the city for the building located at Mills and Carter is known for some Norwood residents as the Flying Penis Mural. There appears to be a baby and a penis portrayed in the shadowing of the mural. So what if the mural artist insists there is no flying penis and yet many residents see it without question? Is there a mechanism in place to prevent explicit genitalia from being painted on a building? The answer is no, because that would violate the First Amendment rights. I don't care if anyone delights in Mapplethorpe, flowers, landscapes, or abstract art, because we are all different. Everyone has the right to put any art they choose in their homes and enjoy and appreciate. Why does anyone feel the need to impose their taste in art, political, or social issues on others when others don't want it? There are beautiful murals and artwork throughout the world. There are also horrible, disgusting, and offensive murals. Without content restrictions, we are leaving ourselves open to anything goes and allowing murals to be seen in residential neighborhoods is a quality of life for the residents. Murals are controversial throughout the country, so please don't rush into approving any mural ordinance. And here's why. These ordinances in front of you have no specific penalties, so what happens if a mural falls in disrepair? I believe it is something like the letter goes out to the owner, then after some time, a second letter goes out, then after some more time, the building commissioner might cite the owner to court. It might take several months to get a warrant served on the owner. The owner goes to court, the judge kindly gives the owner 6 months to repair. After 6 months, the mural is not repaired, then the entire process repeats. It could be years before any owner of any mural would have any consequences for the mural left in disrepair. We see this happen all the time in Norwood. We have seen buildings in Norwood deteriorating and blighted, and in so many cases, we have looked at these for years without any enforcement. Much of this is because the process to enforce is so lengthy and cumbersome. I am dismayed that neither of the ordinances in tonight's agenda include better provisions for oversight, regulations, and penalties for violations. I recommend that the following be added to the ordinance prior to your consideration. Murals are not visible from any residence, painted only by a professional muralist, have written and approved maintenance and graffiti removal schedule, installed with an actual mural primer and an actual mural paint and mural sealant to deter peeling, chipping, and to make graffiti removal easier. Absolutely spell out which department in the city oversees the regulations for murals, along with the process of stated fines and penalties to make sure that these rules are followed. Thank you. The next one and the final one that I'll read for right now. Lynn Ellis, 4630 Baker. First, let me say thank you for allowing my letter to be read on council floor. COVID-19 prevents myself and others from attending meetings in person. I might add, I am disappointed by the remarks of some councilmen that suggest those that want to speak against murals should come and present their concerns. It shows a lack of compassion. I know 7 families that have lost family members, not all elderly, to this virus. How did we get here? How is it murals are so controversial? I would say that it started with one councilman that handed off a petition, even though it might be considered public document, to an opposing group. Perception becomes reality. Battle lines get drawn, and it quickly becomes us versus them mentality. I personally don't mind murals. I think it is a given that having them here in our 3 square mile city will be opening Pandora's box. Although the First Amendment carves out some areas that are not included under freedom of speech, it is very possible that we will see subjects that are offensive, unsightly, provocative, and what could be considered poor taste. The art board that has been discussed is really an appeasement board. They have no real power, and if someone wants to paint a mural that is covered under the First Amendment, they can't stop them. That would be a lawsuit. I believe it is short-sighted to put all your eggs in one basket. Murals are a short-term fix for a long-term problem. It is true that we have no outlets for art in Norwood. I think there is a bigger picture that some of these special interest groups are missing. Norwood could have its own Pendleton Art Center, maybe a smaller version, but a destination nonetheless. Norwood could have its own version of Old Milford downtown, where there is art, antiques, and boutiques that sell artisan pottery, jewelry, furniture, soaps, etc. If you want a better Norwood, why not an area like the aforementioned? Stop trying to reinvent the wheel. Try talking to others that were activists long before you were born and find out what has been tried. Draw from their wisdom and experience. When a group uses demands, demons, others, and roll their eyes at those of us that are proud to be born and raised here, you surely get pushback, division, or pushback and division. Until these other options for the art void are considered, I believe having murals in non-residential areas is the only option. Unfortunately, because of demands of single-minded groups with their own agenda, I fear nothing good will come of this. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. I'll reread item L6. L6 is ordinance amending Chapter 1321 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances to allow murals in certain areas of the city of Norwood, A. Mr. Thompson.
I would recommend we have the first reading of this ordinance but I would like to amend it due to the change in ordinance coming next that removed MBD from F2. I would like to have the MBD moved to F3 as part of that, because if we don't do that, then it's left out completely, so.
Can you clarify that?
There's, the ordinance that's coming up after this has removed neighborhood business district from F2, but it did not replace it in this ordinance where it would have gone if Mr. Gabbard had had it where he had intended it to begin with. So it's not just the one ordinance that needed updated, this one also needs amended to adjust for that change.
So I'm sorry, to adjust for that, are you saying to add in the commercial?
I will defer to the law director, but in F2, we say on buildings in district zone for commercial uses, and we include NBD in that. I would like to go ahead and move that NBD to 3. Or do we need to do that, Mr. Moore?
Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Mr. President. There's not really a need to do that. The change was just to option B, which the idea being that was to be limited to commercial areas. And while NBD is a commercial area, Mr. Gabbard contacted me to clarify that his intent was to not include the neighborhood business district commercial areas because they're right up next to, they're really more neighborhoody than commercial. So because option A is designed to allow them in, like, everywhere,
Because it comes first,
except for a house or apartment building that's not being used for a commercial use. It's fine to leave A the way it is. I understand the logic of what you're doing. If you really want to distinguish between the two, move the MBD down to part 2, down to number 3, to really clarify the difference. But as a practical matter, it doesn't make a difference because the first one was designed to include that anyway.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
It was just, I just didn't want to get it left out of.
Right, exactly.
I don't know why you would not be confused when everybody else is.
I would like to change to my motion to just have the first reading of this ordinance.
So we have a motion by Mr. Thompson to have the first reading of the ordinance. Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Bonzel. Mr. Thompson.
Right, so what we've got here before us today are 2 ordinances. One of them, it's a very simple difference between the 2 of them. This first ordinance allows for murals in all the same places as the other ordinance. In addition to that, we allow for murals on a building within a district zone for residential uses, currently occupied by a permitted or approved school use or conditional commercial use. In simple terms, what that means is there are certain buildings in residential areas that could potentially have a mural on them. Those would be like the corner stores that we've talked about here today. The thing I want to point out is it's for these corner stores that have been approved for a conditional commercial use. So it's not just any one of these buildings can have it done. If you've got an apartment in one of those buildings, we're sorry, you can't do it. If you've put a house in one of those buildings, we're sorry, you can't do it. If you own one of those buildings and there is no business in it, we're sorry, you can't do it. It's a very narrow possibility for being able to do this in residential areas. I think when we look at this as being an economic opportunity, that's why we put it into the Economic Development Commission. These are the kinds of things that, when we put murals in industrial areas or in already commercial areas, they're not going to broaden economic development like they will if we offer them in these areas, because what this is going to do is allow for people who may be interested in purchasing a building or moving a business to Norwood into one of these small things to say, yes, I do want to rehab that building, and I will be able to attract some extra, a little attention to it by putting a mural on it. So when it comes to economic development, I think this is actually the ordinance that covers off on that better. And as I said, it's a very small subset of residential areas. They're not going to be going up all over the place, but I think that this is, I think this is better because it does open up the possibility of use in these unused properties that we have throughout the city, and hopefully will help bring actual development into some of these areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Mr. President. So, I am definitely concerned about kind of how both, how these ordinances have come about tonight, especially, particularly the next one, even though we're going to talk about it. I think they're kind of grouped together because there were certain decisions that were made about kind of how Ordinance A was written based on what we knew about Ordinance B, because every version that we've had in Ordinance B had neighborhood business district included. And even though it was told to me that the intent was always not to allow them in neighborhoods, but that's what we all understood, that Ordinance B, the one I have right here that was in my packet, Ordinance B includes the neighborhood business districts. And frankly, if we're not going to allow, and the reason why I'm talking about down, I think they're linked together. I think it's a joint discussion because we might need to put both of these back into committee. So if we're not going to allow items in neighborhood business districts because they're too close to residential, we might need to take out general business district as well, because most general business district areas border a residential district. And I don't know how we can allow them in general business districts, knowing that residents can see them, but we don't allow them in neighborhood business districts. The change that Mr. Thompson was suggesting in Ordinance A was moving the neighborhood business district down to the residential section. What it does is it says that any property in a neighborhood business district has to have a commercial use to have a mural. Currently, the way that the Ordinance A is written is that any property, residential use or not, if it's in a neighborhood business district, it could have a mural. And so I think that, again, just getting the new Ordinance B 5 minutes before the meeting, and having no time to really think about it, no time to figure out kind of the impacts, it feels, it's just very concerning to me. But going back to Ordinance A, I am going to support Ordinance A. I truly feel like Ordinance A moves the city forward. But I just have concerns about the process overall.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Mr. Garrett?
Yes. In regards to this, just so people can be clear, and the Economic Development Committee, as we've gone through this, we decided that we would have two versions, and I was trying to be as clear as could possibly be. The last council meeting, the packets that were in there, those were wrong as well. And I have communication at home that I'd sent an email before then saying, hey, these are not supposed to have any residential in them. So B should have, the whole big difference of this was either is one would allow pretty much across the board, the other one would not allow in residential. That's kind of where we came from. So when these came out, Mr. Moore sent it to me, I think on Wednesday. I was having computer issues and wasn't able to look at his red line version. When I was able to on Saturday morning, I immediately sent him an email saying, hey, point of clarification here, this should not have any residential in it, and that's how we got to that point. So that's why we have the two versions. One is kind of across the board. The other one has central business district, general business district, and M1, M2. So, but for the purpose of, right now we're on A, I will be voting yes to approve the readings. I want us to have the readings. I want people to see both ordinances as we go through, because this will be the next two council meetings as well, second and then the third. So we'll have plenty of time for people to look over the ordinances and ask questions or reach out. So that's the reason. It's not, hey, you said you were going to be against this. No, I want us to have when we get to the third reading, then there will be a vote on which ordinance you want to go for. But I think it's only fair that we have all three readings of both ordinances, so it's fair to have a vote of up or down on those two. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Anyone else? Mr. Bonzo?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll just reserve my comments for the next one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo.
Yeah.
Mr. DiNardo?
I was in the same Economic Development Committee where I agree with the intent and everything you're trying to say, except for one part. You said across the board. We said in residential area, but they had to have the commercial element to it.
And that's the way it is.
I know that someone said it, just you made a comment that it'd be. I didn't want someone to think that we were saying the A is good to go. That's not the case, but I know that you were trying to say that.
Mr. Gabbard?
And I appreciate you pointing that out. I used that in actually a wrong term. And what I was trying to get across is A lists a whole lot more opportunities.
I'm with you.
Than B. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yeah.
Mr. Kelch?
Yeah.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, motion passes. Moving on to item L.
Do the first reading.
I'm sorry, forgive me.
Ordinance amending Chapter 1321 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances to allow murals in certain areas of the city of Norwood.
Thank you, Mrs. Rhodes. Moving on to item L7, ordinance amending Chapter 1321 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances to allow murals in certain areas of the city of Norwood. B. Mr. Gabbard?
I make a motion, we have the first reading of ordinance B.
Motion by Mr. Gabbard to have the first reading. Mr. Thompson?
Second.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Mr. Bonzo?
Thank you very much, Mr. President. So, I've got the zoning map pulled up. Anybody online can look at it. Just Google Norwood, Ohio zoning map. And the first link will take you to the zoning map. If you look at the zoning map, purple is neighborhood business district. Blue is the general business district. And I'm sorry for everybody, I would have printed this out tonight if I would have known. And green, yellow, and brown are mostly your residential. And if you look at this, and you can look at, the general business district, all up and down Montgomery Road, you can see some on Smith, but there's quite a few places where there's general business district in the middle of neighborhoods. We've got general business district along Ivanhoe, on the east side of Ivanhoe, between Montgomery Road, all the way up to Hopkins Avenue. And there's quite a few houses that are there. If the intent is to not have it on housing or in residential areas, then I almost think that we need to take both these ordinances back to committee and talk about this further. One amendment I'm hoping that potentially we could look at as a compromise is potentially only allowing murals, or if we allow murals in neighborhood business districts, to allow the murals only on buildings that have commercial uses. That severely limits the number of buildings that are in neighborhood business districts today. But the building has to have a commercial use. To me, I thought that was the intent of having A and B, and the reason why we were willing to split up A and B the way that we were is because we knew that neighborhood business districts, in some form were included in both. And so today, again, it's a pretty big change because some of the original people that have been pushing for murals for, the last couple of years, that are in areas where there would be very little impact to people's houses, are people that are going to be now excluded the way that this change that came to us 5 minutes before the council meeting is showing. And I just think it's just not what we intend, it's not what we talked about at the committee meeting. It's not what was presented to us, except tonight. Tonight's the first time. So, I would like to make a motion that we amend Ordinance B to include neighborhood business district on any building with an approved, or basically with an approved or grandfather, basically with a commercial, on any building with a commercial use in a neighborhood business district. So my motion is to amend Ordinance B to add a section F3 to allow for commercial uses, murals in neighborhood business districts on buildings with commercial uses.
Mr. Bonzo, we have a motion by Mr. Gabbard and a second by Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, I'm trying to amend that motion.
Please.
I'm making a motion to amend the ordinance that we're considering right now.
Yeah, I'll rescind my second so that it can be amended if Mr. Gabbard would choose to.
That's what I was asking.
I would be willing to just remove general business district, but I'm not adding MBD in on B. But if you want, if you're concerned about the fact that GBD somebody could paint the back of Kroger's and a residents could see that, then I'm willing to remove that as an amendment, but I'm not adding any others. The whole, like I said, the whole purpose was no residential and residential, to be able to have it, we had two options. And I believe the other committee members understood that same thing, and, you're saying that we all believed it a different, I don't think that that's the case, if you want to ask.
I was going to raise my hand at the next discussion and say that I actually I did walk away with exactly this. I thought that this met the intent that I had discussed. I know it's what you thought too. So it's a shame that, you felt that you've walked away a little bit differently, but I thought separating them was allowed that corner store situation that you talked about to exist, and B did not. And my hope was that A would go through, but if they didn't, that's how votes go, and B existed to achieve at least some of the intent.
Anyone else? Mr. Bonzo.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, I'm thinking that there's, just from my hearing, that there's a fundamental, there's not a lot of understanding, or at least there's some misunderstanding of the zoning code in Norwood. I guess I left a meeting, and it's been discussed, I brought it up at Economic Development Committee meetings, are we including neighborhood business districts? Because I speak the language of the code that we have neighborhood business districts, we have general business districts, we've got R1, R2, R3, RMX. There are multiple zones, and so I've read the code, I understand the code, and I'm not trying to brag, but I'm just saying that was how I left the meeting, because that was how we talked about it. We said neighborhood business districts are okay. And so, again, the change is part of it, that's surprising to me, because again, every version that we've had, and I would have loved to have had a deeper conversation at the Economic Development Committee meeting, if I would have known after all of the versions that we've done, that all of a sudden neighborhood business district was not going to be approved. And there was other conversations as well that happened that, would led me to believe that, that neighborhood business districts would have been included as well. So again, it's just a pretty big change as we're here today. I'm not sure about I potentially would be supportive of taking out the general business districts at this point. I think there's so many of those in residential areas that I think it's just concerning that it potentially could have an impact on those neighborhoods in the exact same way that having them in neighborhood business districts would have. But again, there's a lot of uncertainty again, because I haven't had a chance to fully vet this out. So, I would still like to see us talk about it in Economic Development Committee again, and have a fuller discussion and just leave with one united ordinance so that we can all understand that what we're voting on. And the community can understand too, kind of like what these changes do.
Thank you, Mr. Bonsall. Mr. Dracy?
So I had 4 pages of questions. I whittled it down to 21. However, because obviously we're not sure as to where this is going right now, whether it's going back to economic development, whether we're going to have an amended ordinance, whether we're going to vote on the ordinance in front of us. I'll say this one thing for right now until I figure out if I'm going to read the rest of these questions. Okay? For this to be worked on, for what I'm being told, for 2 years, maybe longer, to come out with a two-page, extremely vague ordinance is astonishing to me. This is something that I have been complaining about for at least 2 years, and it was something I complained about when I campaigned, is that our ordinances in this city are extremely vague and whittled down to where they're an umbrella type of ordinance. You know, it's almost like the wild, wild west, where if we can find a loophole in a 2-page ordinance, we will find a loophole in a 2-page ordinance. I think some of my questions, if this goes back into committee, can be answered in that committee and possibly addressed in that committee. Otherwise, I can ask them all tonight, and we can address them tonight if you'd like. That's up to council members. I don't mind asking them. I don't mind getting the answers for them. But if it goes back to Economic Development Committee, then I'll ask them there. But I'll take advice from you guys if you want me to ask them all right now or wait until it's in committee, or if it's not in committee, then I'll ask them all tonight.
Mr. McGavin?
I'm sure glad, I didn't really realize you had a law degree. We pay a law department to put together these ordinances, and this is what they come up with. We don't have to dictate every single jot and tittle on every little thing, when it also applies as a part of the other parts of the code in there. There's no reason for Mr. Moore or Mr. Gary to write it out in every single little, paragraph when it's already being addressed in something else. So, but, I mean, if you've got your law degree, maybe you should run for law department next time. If you want to feel like you want to ask all your questions, feel free. I got all night. So, I mean, I'm in no hurry.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Let me back up for just a second. Mr. Thompson, you rescinded your motion. Michael, did you rescind your?
I still want to have the first reading.
Okay. So on the floor right now, before we get any further discussion, you made a motion to have the first reading.
First reading.
Okay. Hold on just a second. Do I have a second? Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, I'll second it.
You'll second. Okay.
I'd like to-
Now discussion. I saw Mr. Kelch had his hands up first. I'll ask him.
Thank you, Mr. President. The first ordinance, I don't agree with it all. I don't support. I think that's just too much for right now. I like art. I'm an artist, but I have a lot of people hitting me up in my ward where all this controversy is taking place. A lot of people that don't feel comfortable coming to speak at a meeting for various reasons, that don't really feel comfortable speaking online for various reasons. But my number's public record, my address is public record, so they feel comfortable talking to me. So with that said, I do support ordinance B, and I would support 3 readings and vote it in right now. We're allowing murals in parts of Norwood, and that's still progress. I think it's clear that the previous council member's amendment or attempted amendment to this is simply just to give what this ordinance is not designed to give. My level of reading comprehension, it was clear that this was not designed to have any ordinances in any neighborhood area, any residential area. And to try to attempt to add that in, I feel like is a bit gratuitous, when I feel like, just gauging the room, that I think we'd all probably support this ordinance right now tonight. So I would urge us to kind of just, let's vote to have this reading. Let's see this thing going, and I will be supporting ordinance B.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, I just want to say, I do not support putting these ordinances back in committee.
Yeah.
I think we've talked about them enough. I'm sorry, Mr. Bonsall, that this bit of zoning code is a snag, but I do think in the spirit of what we discussed, it was to separate business from residential and a neighborhood business district. And in my mind, kind of covered, like, whether those corner stores are part of neighborhood business districts or not, it's the same idea. So in my mind, it was that's why I didn't fight having it removed, and why I sort of tried to move it within the first ordinance, because I felt that the first ordinance was where it should be addressed. Leaving it where it was within the first ordinance, it still gets addressed in that ordinance, which is why we didn't do that. So I don't want to put it back. I think we've got two good ordinances with clear delineation of scope, and I think we should just move forward and do a vote or answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Dracy?
All right. Mr. Gabbard, I appreciate your comments. I also do not support the GBD being on the second ordinance. And, you know, if we're amending any ordinance, it needs to be, take the GBD off there, because if other residents within the neighborhood don't have the opportunity or don't want to look at the murals, but those on Lafayette say, have to look at the murals on the back of Surrey Square, that to me is not fair. So I would say that I would love to see the GBD taken out of there and do this strictly like what Mr. Gabbard had mentioned. There's one that has an all-in for residents, businesses, whatever it may be, and there's one that is strictly manufacturing and strictly, I guess, commercial use, as we're calling it. So one of the questions that I have here, and some of these may be repetitive from people that have written in, just because it seems like a lot of people that have written to me in the past day, because these were created probably 4 or 5 days ago.
Could we not repeat them then? Could we not repeat them then?
Well, I'm just saying, there's some of them that might repeat from the 2 letters I read.
Mr. Nardo?
Sorry.
Once again, like I said, no mural should be visible from a residential property. One, you know, there's all kinds of articles that people can bring me and say that murals raise the property values of these houses. However, I will tell you, speaking with 6, now if you want me to go higher, but 6 real estate agents, that a mural on a piece of property that faces a residential home only attracts a specific buyer, okay? Now you've reduced your pool from, let's say, 100% of buyers to maybe 10% of buyers. Now you've got a $200,000 house that could get lowballed into a $150,000 house or a $140,000 house, because those realtors say, well, this house has no attraction, nobody wants to go see it because of that mural. And that buyer may go, I love that mural, but if there's nobody bidding on it, I'll go ahead and put my low ball in there and see if they'll take it. Now you're reducing your pool of buyers. That is why I'm trying to get the GBD and the MBD out of that ordinance, just because we don't want somebody on Lafayette not being able to sell their house for the price that they should be getting if it was in a different area of that city, because that area didn't have a mural. Why isn't there language in here referencing a professional muralist, okay? Why
Is there or isn't there?
Why can't you have language in there for a professional muralist?
My guess would be, if I can, that's First Amendment. A person doesn't have to have a professional do their artwork for them if they consider themselves an artist. Whoever wants to do that can do that. Plus, I don't know that there's really I don't know that people register anywhere as professional muralists. It's just sort of something people do. So that's why it's not in there.
Okay. And as far as the products, I believe in here it states high-quality materials. There's no specific idea of what a high-quality material is. There's mural art out there. There's mural sealant out there. There's things out there that we should be specifying in here, because right here it says high-quality materials. I could literally go out there with exterior paint a mural, and let it go, just based on that. And this is where I come back to it being slightly vague. I understand you guys did a ton of work on this, okay? I get that. But like I said, there are things that I saw in here that I could perceive and anybody else could perceive as being vague. So something like high-quality material, to me, could be any paint that could go outside. Exterior paint from Sherwin-Williams. Maybe that's splitting hairs, I don't know.
Is there a question you have in regards to that, or are you just making a statement?
Why we've just got it as a high-quality material versus having it laid out as mural paint, mural sealant?
Mr. Thompson.
I don't know that I can address specifically the why high quality, but I will say that somebody who is willing to invest in putting a mural on their property, it's a significant financial investment because of the amount of materials required to put it on. So it would behoove them to not just go get cheap paint and slap it on their wall. They would probably learn about that when going through the process and talking to the arts board, which we will establish to go along with this. That part of that is also an education process for people who haven't done it. So they'll be there to help suggest those things too. We're not going to specify brands of paint that you have to use to paint your wall any more than we specify brands of paint that residents have to use. So that's why we are assuming that a person deciding to put a mural and make that expense and understanding what it does to their property value to have a good mural and or bad mural and one falling apart or one that is well taken care of will make the decision to use good quality materials.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Gabbard, did you have your hand up, sir?
No, you did a great job.
Mr. Dracy?
The other thing I don't see in here are fines or penalties that are laid out. Now, I guess the answer you guys are going to answer to me is, well, that's under the building commission. But why not put something into this ordinance that lays out a specific fine, such as 30 days to repair a mural or remove graffiti, and then $100 a day until it's removed? Any repercussions for not maintaining these murals creates less incentive to actually maintain or repair them. And who's the fine going to be put on, the muralist or the property owner?
Mr. Bonsall?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to respond to that, so this is going to be in the overall Chapter 1321. And Chapter 1321.99 is the penalty section of the chapter. This is just amending a small part of the overall chapter. And that says, violation of the provisions of this chapter by any person, including any individual, partnership, firm, or corporation, or failure to comply with any of its requirements shall constitute a misdemeanor of the first degree. In addition, such person shall pay all costs and expenses involved in the case. Each day such violation continues or occurs after receipt of a violation notice shall be considered a separate offense. The owner or tenant of any building, structure, premise, or part thereof, and any architect, builder, contractor, agent, or other person who commits, participates in, assists in, or maintains such violation may each be found guilty of a separate offense and suffer the penalties herein provided. Nothing herein contained shall prevent the city from taking such other lawful action as is necessary to prevent or remedy any violation. So essentially, this is covered it is covered, the penalty's covered at the end of chapter 1321. This is just a subsection, so we don't have individual penalties in the subsections.
So it's covered under a criminal code, but not a civil code under a fine structure,
Moore.
correct?
Thank you, Mr. President. It's covered in exactly the same way that every other sign, any kind of sign, any commercial sign is covered. So billboards, illuminated signs, sidewalk signs, they're covered by the same penalty provision enforced by the same department.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Tracy?
You got 21, 16 more.
I'll cut these down a little bit for you guys. The other thing I had highlighted on here was the definition of a mosaic. And the reason that I highlighted that was that I heard a councilman bring up the fact that that plaster could be put on a wall and chipped away to create this mural or this art or this mosaic. But here's my thinking on that, okay? A homeowner can get fined by the building department and forced, I was, when I owned my old house, for chipping paint on one spindle. I was forced to paint the entire spindle, the entire railing, not just the one spindle, but the entire railing, to accommodate that one piece of chipping paint. So if we look at the side of a building that has plaster on it as a mosaic or a mural, how can we not consider that to be chipping or in disrepair, just like we would anything on a residential property?
Mr. Thompson?
Because this will have gone through the process of applying for and going through the process of being allowed to do a mural. So it's an aesthetic thing, and it is subjective. I would probably say that what you're not going to see is what looks like a poorly painted wall with paint peeling off of it. That I don't think will, I can't imagine anybody who would want to invest in a mural that looked like just chipping paint off of a spindle. But there are different mediums for which you can put murals on a wall with, and that was one example I had used. I can show you images of those if you want to see them. It's a very famous artist who does them around the country, around the world. And what it doesn't look like is chipping paint. It's a process, and it's a medium for this artist to create artwork. So that's why that example, I use that example, but that's why we have the mosaic kind of thing in there, because there's different ways to create images on a wall. It could be with paint, and to be perfectly honest with you, probably 95% of the time to 100% of the time in our neighborhoods here in Norwood, it's going to be paint. But you can do murals out of mosaic tile or out of different kinds of things. The whole point is to make an aesthetically pleasing picture, at least to the artist, and that's why that's included in there.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
So
Mr.
to
Tracy?
follow up on that, I'm sorry. If a person that owns a house with a plaster wall on the exterior has chipping plaster off of their wall, what would you expect the building department to do? The building department will go out, issue a letter, hey, you need to fix that. I mean, can that person go out and technically say, well, that's a mural or create a mural?
But no, they couldn't, because it's on a residential structure, which they're not allowed to do, and they haven't gone through the process.
Well, we haven't voted for any of that yet, but what I'm saying is.
But that's what we are talking about, so you can't rewrite the ordinance just to fit the narrative.
Well, no. Okay, well, we had another councilman discuss both ordinances at the same time, so I'm kind of moving into the other ordinance that.
That's fine.
Of, let's say, a resident says that that's a mural.
Yeah. Did you understand what we were talking about when we described what A was about it being on very specific properties,
Correct.
not houses? They are on businesses, and so, but you're using as your example a resident on a resident
Well, then I'll
house.
change that to a business.
Okay. Have they gone through the process of doing a mural?
Absolutely.
And if they have gone through that process of doing a mural, and it has gone through the Art Advisory Board, and they have put it up there, and for whatever reason, they chose to make it look like a tore-down plaster wall. I suppose that if a business owner wanted to do that and thought that was going to increase their property value and increase people's perception of their business, that under this code, the way that it is, it would be allowed. I cannot imagine somebody wanting to invest money in their own property in such a way that would make people not want to support their business.
And I wouldn't look at it as not supporting the business, or not supporting it or not supporting it, but I have seen, outside of murals, crazier things done to businesses, okay? I have seen it. You look
Fine,
at,
but we're talking
you
about
know,
murals.
I mean, I've seen it done. It might be a hypothetical, but hypothetical typically will turn out to be reality.
Mr. Bonzo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. So I would just say on this subject too, again, if they wanted, I mean, nobody is going to get written up by nobody is able to, if they get written up by the building department. They don't have any murals on their walls. Get written up by the building department. They're not going to be able to then go and say, oh, no, look, that's a mural. They would have had to have submitted the application, paid the application fee, submitted architectural kind of drawings, basically plans of the mural that's going to be there. So I would just, again, these situations are so, they're very much out there when it comes to that, because again, the mural, they would have to have applied ahead of time and said, look, my little chipping paint on my spindle or on my wall, that's my mural. And also, just remember too, there's a minimum for how big a mural has to be. It has to be either 20 by 20 feet, or it has to cover 50% of a wall, whichever is a smaller amount. And so this likely wouldn't even apply anyways.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Mr. DiNardo.
Yeah, first, and I'm sorry for having attitude with you earlier. I would ask that a lot of the questions that you had were brought up throughout the 5 economic committee meetings, and I think that was something that we specifically tried to address in the language that a law department and a lot of people involved considered. I'm only bringing that up to say, I know you had 15 by my count more questions, but is the intent of these questions to try to bring it back to economic committee and change the language? I think so, but if I'm wrong, correct me. Or is it to just bring them up for public thought, which is you're allowed to do, but if it's the latter, we tried to do exactly that in the economic committee, which was televised and has been labored many times.
And I understand that. However, and I've watched these meetings, some of these questions I have not seen addressed in those meetings, and that's why I'm trying to address them now.
So far, 6 for 6, we have addressed them. That's why I said.
I have not heard them addressed in
I
any
mean, that's
meetings.
to be,
Gentlemen, let's make sure all questions and comments go through the chair. Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
thank you. And to be honest with you, that's why we're able to come up with these answers so readily and so quickly, is because we've talked about these at length. I appreciate the questions, and I'm happy to answer as many more you got if I possibly can, because I'm not saying they're not valid questions, but I don't want you to think that because this was a short ordinance, and because we seem to have spent a lot of time on this, but to your eyes, it doesn't look like that we did, that these things haven't been thought and addressed. So if we have to answer the questions to ease your mind that these things have actually been thought and addressed, then I am fine to do that. I think so far, we've done, like you said, 6 for 6, pretty well answered questions. And I don't think any of us has said anything that has surprised anybody who has been in the economic committee, or probably people who have sat in on those committee meetings. I'm looking at Pastor Sonny because he's been gracious enough to attend many of them. Happy to keep going. Happy to answer these questions. I would be happy to answer these questions to anybody who wants to email me or talk to me about this. We are all available for that. But keep going.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Geraci.
To answer Mr. DiNardo's first question, yes, I would like to see a little bit of change on this, because I feel like I, myself, or anybody that wasn't on the Economic Development Committee really had no say in this, as far as what you guys had spoke about.
Jeez,
Yeah.
Now, I did speak with you, Mr. Gabbard, before this meeting, okay? When I looked at it and said, GBD shouldn't be in there as well because it's still within residential areas, I put up that I was in favor of murals, but I didn't want it seen by any residents. It's out there. If you want to go read it, you can go read it. It says it right there. And again, I have, things like such as that are subjective of, the state of repair of a mural. I could say a mural is in disrepair, and Mr. DiNardo could say that it's not in disrepair, that that's part of the mural. Mr. Thompson could say the same thing. Mr. Gabbard could go up and go, no, I agree, that's in disrepair. So the state of disrepair it's subjective unless it's defined clearly as to what the disrepair is.
My question was more, when I said either the first or latter, the first one was, if you want to make a motion to bring it to Economic Committee, you should do that, and then we can see if there's any support for that. That's why I worded it the way I did.
Thank you, Mr. Nardo. Mr. Bonzel?
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I think the ordinance honestly could not be clearer, but before I say that, I do want to defend Mr. Gabbard here. I know that he, if there was any council member that would wanted to attend the committee meeting or to talk with him, I know that he would have been more than happy to have allowed that. We had so much public comment at our economic development meeting, so there's so much opportunity. And the good thing is, we still have a month and a half until, or at least a month until we approve this thing, considering we're going to do one reading per council meeting. And then as far as the maintenance, again, they have to submit a plan. So there will be a plan that gets submitted that shows exactly what the mural is. And if the mural looks differently than what the drawing was, there's 3 drawings they have to submit, then it's going to be the responsibility of the owner to upkeep that mural. And it says here too, when we talk about the materials, again, murals shall include high-quality materials, which may include paint or other media appropriate for exterior use, such as tile or mosaic. Materials shall be long-lasting and graffiti-resistant to the greatest extent possible. The reason why I don't think we could project, and as Mr. Thompson said earlier, we can't assign brands of paint to this thing because one, things just change all the time. Things are constantly getting better and quality is getting improved. But the other one is, so having this somewhat general like this also just allows the flexibility so that councils don't have to, in 5 years, authorize the use of this exact type of paint. It's basically made so that it lasts with the times, exactly like the murals that are going to get put up are going to be made for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzel. Mr. Tracy?
So both Mr. Thompson and Mr. Bonzel brought up the fact that I'm trying to say that we have to put a name brand on a paint. A name or a make, a model, a year. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, all I'm looking at is, can we include something that says a mural paint? That's all. I'm not saying we need to go out and get every single make, model, year of paint and say it has to be specifically this. I'm just asking that it be laid out, that it be a mural paint. Because again, a lot of ordinances, no matter how good you think they are, even at laws at the state level, you can find loopholes in anywhere. And I get it. Even me asking that little portion be added, maybe there's a loophole around that I haven't seen. As it was pointed out, I don't have my law degree. Maybe after I finish up nursing, I'll go back and get my law degree. But the point here is that I'm asking for little things that I thought would have come up without me having to come to a committee meeting and asking about them as a resident. Okay?
Which is why, I'm sorry.
Mr. Thompson?
Which is why we can answer those questions, because you didn't come to those committee meetings, but we were there, and we have talked about these things. I don't know that, like, if you say you have to use a mural paint, there's not too many brands of mural paint out there. There are lots of brands of exterior paint that have lots of different quality and stuff. Very few of them are going to be labeled mural paint. And to be honest with you, I would be questioning the quality of anything that labeled themselves mural paint. So there's reasons why we don't have the things in there. And so I ask you to continue asking your questions so we can get through them and answer them as quickly
Or
as
move
possible.
them to economic committee. Make a motion, we can see if we support it or not.
Well, I mean, if I make a motion and it doesn't get supported, then I still don't get my questions answered now.
Well, gentlemen, there's already a motion and a second on the floor as of the
Correct.
first reading.
That's,
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
I guess, I don't know. The only other thing that I'm really kind of concerned about is the graffiti portion of it. You know, I understand that there's cities out there, I think River Road might be the only one I know of that has the graffiti-resistant paint on the pylons underneath an off-ramp. Did I say River Road? Yeah.
I know what you mean.
Route 50. So how are you defining, because it seemed a little vague. And I'm not, again, these are no disrespect to anybody, I'm just trying to get clarification on it. Because I believe the sentence states, graffiti resistant to the greatest extent possible. What does that entail? What does that mean? I mean, you have specific paint that resists graffiti. However, I don't think you can put that on top of a mural without covering up the mural, because I think there's only like 2 or 3 colors that actually come in this specific graffiti resistant paint. So, I mean, are we looking to say you have to have it a certain height to keep it graffiti resistant? Are we saying, you know, how are we defining that graffiti resistant to the greatest extent possible? Because again, we come into that little bubble of open up and, you know, vague, I guess.
Right.
Mr. Thompson.
I'll try to answer. You're right, there are very few things that are graffiti resistant, which is why we said as possible. But there is entirely possible that somebody might decide to graffiti a mural. That you can put, you can put sealers on the thing, like transparent sealer, to try to minimize the harm done to it. You might eventually have to repaint over that. That's just a possibility that could happen. I would say that all walls that don't have anything on them also attract graffiti. It's like graffiti is an issue, and people should clean that up. I have a feeling if somebody's beautiful mural gets graffitied, they're going to want to clean it up as best as they possibly can. That's why we left it that way.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Any further discussion?
Mr. President.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you. Just I wanted to offer this as, just in context, the sign code. So this governs all the signs, and there are very few residential properties in Norwood that can't see a sign. Or at least not, there's a lot that can, based on the commercial buildings that are just the way that the city's designed. In terms of signs, and this covers all the different kinds of signs you can have in Norwood, it says in the sign code in 1320-105, signs shall be constructed of durable material capable of withstanding continuous exposure to the elements and conditions of the urban environment. It doesn't go through and say, it's got to be this kind of plastic, it's got to be this kind of paint, it's got to be this kind of wood. It does recommend specific types, and it does go on to say that materials such as wood, metal, ceramic, and stone, synthetic materials should only be used if they're designed to resemble the recommended natural elements, but that's an aesthetic issue, not a durability issue. Plastic and acrylic panels are strongly discouraged. So when I drafted this, the reason that I didn't put in a lot of specifics, first, because I'm not, I don't know what kind of engineer that would be, but primarily because it's the kind of thing that every single one is going to be a little bit different, and And the idea is, like, here's the intent, don't bring us something that we know is going to be made out of crap and fall apart in 3 years. And to match kind of what we have for the sign code. Because these things change over time, and what's available changes over time. The graffiti resistance, the ability to clean graffiti has changed dramatically in the last 10, 15 years, based on some pretty common kind of materials that are out there. But that's the reason. It's not more specific as far as what the materials need to be and to have, like specifications for them. So just some background. Maybe there's a better answer, but that's just the logic behind the language that I used.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Anyone else? Mr. Tracy?
All right. I appreciate everybody answering questions. I appreciate you sticking it out. I'll cut my questions short. I appreciate the time that was put into this and the effort that was put into this. I do. I'm not taking that away from any of you guys, okay? Absolutely not. Because my tone sounds a little, that's my tone. That's just how it is. It's kind of like the faces that are made. I don't want to say it over public air, but it's kind of like the face that's made, okay? That's just my tone. I don't come out trying to be mean about anything. I'm just asking questions, and I appreciate the answers to the questions. However, I will say for my last thing, I cannot support this, at least the second one either, just because the GBD is in there, and I would like to see that removed. Just as Mr. Gabbard had said earlier, we have one that includes everything, and we have one that includes that does not include any residential or visual of murals from any residential home.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Anyone else? Mr. Gabbard?
I'd like to amend my motion to remove the GDB. And if I could ask a question to the law director, does that say office in there as well?
Mr. Moore?
Yes, it does. The discussion was, okay, in the initial discussion of the request that I got, and I think Mr. Thompson did kind of a rough draft, like, here's some of the guidelines we want, just kind of an outline of it, and it was like commercial. And so what I did is I put in that section all of the commercial districts, and that's manufacturing 1 and 2, central business, general business, neighborhood business, office. And so I just included all of them. So I don't have a specific, I didn't look at the map to see, kind of where those would all lie.
Mr. Gabbard?
Follow-up question.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Based on this discussion, and I'm going to amend my initial motion to remove GDB, but should we remove office as well? So it's strictly just Central Business District, M1, M2.
Mr. Moore?
Would that be advisable?
I will not support that.
Yeah, that's not what we really talked
Okay,
about.
all right.
I can say I don't.
What about the GDB?
I will not support you removing that either.
All right.
I think.
We'll leave it as is.
Mr. Thompson?
I think we live in a very densely packed city. We have, it's impossible almost from any resident to not see another business or a sign. So if you're trying to eliminate the possibility that a resident could potentially see a mural, then we should not be doing murals in our city. The whole point is for residents and people who come to our city to be able to see the murals. So I do not support removing from the general business district. I support your removing the neighborhood business district, your original one, but I don't support amending any farther.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Gabbard, did you rescind your,
Yeah.
you rescinded your motion?
No, we're on. Yep.
And you're okay, Mr. Thompson?
Still second.
Yep.
Mr. Tracy?
Again, I mean, we can go through 3 separate readings of this, and I'll get to the end, and I'll tell you right now, I still won't support this with GBD in there. And the biggest reason is because this whole thing that started out, when this started out months ago, and then as it evolved, came out to, let's have an ordinance for everything, let's have an ordinance so that residents cannot see it. And I don't think it's fair to put the residents into this category to where, if they don't want to walk out or have a cup of coffee at 7 o'clock in the morning on their porch, that they need to look at this, or that they go to sell their house, and they end up with a smaller pool of people because of that mural. You know, we're not allowing, you know, the residents such as Lafayette to have the same freedoms as somebody on South Madison. So, I mean, I'm trying to be as fair as I can, and again, I did not want murals at all in the city of Norwood, at all, okay? I heard from one side, I heard from the other side. I'm trying to come into the middle here, where I've got residents, especially on Lafayette, that don't agree with the GBD because they don't want to they don't want to come out and see it. They don't want to try to sell their house with that there. And they're not held under the same, I guess, umbrella as those on South Madison or South Jefferson, to where those people over there don't have to worry about these murals because they don't have any of that general business district around them. And, you know, again, I could support this ordinance if the GBD is out. I don't know how anybody else really feels other than what's been discussed here, and I've kind of got a feeling of how it's going. But again, I think we need to try and be as fair as possible. That's the only reason I'm asking for the GBD to be removed, is to try and be as fair as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Geraci. Mr. Gabbard.
I'd like to comment on the statement that, you know, the discussion was about residents being able to see from their residence. That was never part of this discussion, never. But yet you say you watched our show, our show. It seemed like it was a show at times. But the councilman says he watched our meetings. The thing was, keep it out of residential. I dare say there's a place in Norwood, unless you put it on a backside of one of the buildings on Highland Avenue, that you're not going to be able to see something from a resident's home somewhere, or apartment, or whatever. So they're going to be seen from a residential. My thing was to try to keep them out of the residential area. But there's going to be occasions where you can still see it. And so that's what the differentiation was. It wasn't about not being able to see it from a residential. It was to keep it out of technically the residential areas.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. One, I just want to remind council members that, just remind everybody that, I mean, there can be motions made while a substantive motion, the motion for the reading is here. I mean, we can vote to end debate. We can vote to it. We can make a motion to adjourn. We can make a motion to suspend the rules of council. There's like 12 of them that we can do while we're here. So I just want to be really clear that there can be multiple motions on the floor, and one motion could be to amend a motion that's out there. So it seemed like there was some confusion earlier. I just want to clear that up, and I'm getting all of this directly from the rules of council. The other item, I will say that Mr. Geraci makes compelling arguments, because there's a ton of housing in general business district and even in office district. And I just don't know how much we've all reviewed the zoning map to actually understand, like, if we don't want them in any neighborhoods at all, because that's why we took neighborhood business district out, even though we could have amended it to include only commercial buildings. Well, we're doing a disservice then by including the general business district, because there's people that can just put up whatever they want on a single family house. And we had talked about that. The intent of this wasn't to do that. So, it's pretty, and to me, in my opinion, there's still a lot of misunderstanding here. And the fact that we're trying to segment out districts like this, it's being very imperfect, because there's some people that are getting left out, and then there's other people that probably shouldn't be included that are going to be included the way that the ordinance is written. So I'm going to vote no on the reading, but I do think that it needs more work before we consider it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
No.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present? We have 5 ayes, 1 no. Motion passes. we have the first reading?
Ordinance amending Chapter 1321 of the Norwood Codified Ordinances to allow murals in certain areas of Norwood.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Moving on to item L8, ordinance authorizing the mayor or safety service director to purchase an ambulance with an upgraded patient care compartment with air filtration and sterilization capabilities necessary to mitigate exposure of coronavirus and other airborne diseases and declaring an emergency. Mr. DiNardo.
Yep, I'd like to have all three readings, please.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to have all three readings. Mr. Gabbard?
Second the motion.
Second by Mr. Gabbard. Any discussion, Mr. DiNardo?
Yep. I'd actually like the mayor to correct the date. I had it in a text, it was October 15th, in which we had to have purchase requisitions. Was that correct?
Mr. Mayor?
That's correct. The date is October 15th, that it has to be, that all of those requisitions have to be completed. I put October 1st to give us a little bit of time.
Cool.
To make sure.
I just wanted people to know.
Correct.
And the intent, and I'd like you to follow on, please, is to, I guess, exhaust the Corona Fund in a way that best supports our city. And the ambulance felt like the best way to do that, because one, well, we're gonna need one anyway next year. And two, all the other uses of funds wouldn't come close to the hundreds of thousands that we have in there. So there was a very prescribed way that we could apply to qualify the use of funds, and this feels like it would meet the need. But do you want to follow on, please?
Mr. Mayor?
It does not exhaust the funds that we have. We will
No, it's
still-
like 400,000.
We'll still end up sending money back, but this was a way, and is a way, to improve the passenger transport that we have, improve our crew safety, and bring in another asset to the city to battle coronavirus and other airborne diseases that could potentially come along.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Gabbard?
I'd like to ask the fire chief to come up and just give us a lowdown on this particular ambulance, if he would.
Just giving it air. Feel bad for him.
Good evening. So this it's been a long process. We've been working on this for 10, 14 days. There's a lot of hoops to go through with CARES funding and getting it qualified. Initially, what we were trying to do is actually manufacture another unit, and in doing so, our units now are pretty base spec, so getting one that's on the line and doing it to our basic spec additions is pretty easy. We found one on the line, but it would not come in until mid-January, so that would make that expenditure not applicable to CARES funds. So what we've done is we've done a nationwide search looking for a wheeled coach that best matches what we have. We found one in New York. Almost identical. We're gonna have to do a couple things to it. We're gonna have to do some additions to it, minor stuff. We should have it, and we will definitely complete the purchase and have it in hand way before the December 30th timeline that's required by CARES funds.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Gabbard?
Yeah, Chief, great job again on being able to find something in such a short amount of time to be able to fit this need and to be able to use that. How does that play in our numbers as far as our complement?
So basically we run 2 ambulances staffed, and we keep a third in reserve. So with the FRP last year, we purchased a new ambulance. We've got it actually at the dealer right now. I'm having a couple upgrades done to it to mirror what we're doing with this possible purchase. In terms of the UV filtration, the HVAC, we're adding that in now. It was just something we never really ever thought about. We never had a need for it. And with the COVID issue, it made a lot of sense. It upgrades the patient compartment air immensely. So we're having that done to that. So this will put us, basically, we have 3 units that are all above, they'll all be within 2018 or newer. It will allow us to rotate our ambulances through a regular maintenance cycle, whereas there's been a number of times where we have our 2018 in service and the other two are out of service with mechanical, which puts a stress on the fire equipment then. So it's a long-standing issue. You know, our next ambulance purchase, to be clear, was scheduled for '24 within the capital plan. I would recommend that maintains there, but we'll have a really good idea if we're able to do this, cycle those 3 ambulances over the next, I'd say we'd have a really good idea maintenance-wise in the 18-month period. It standardizes fleet, it standardizes parts, we'll have the same units across the board.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Gabbard?
If you could just let the folks at home know about how many EMS runs that we do in a year, just so they get a feel of why we need 3 and to put on a rotation like that.
Sure. So, just spitballing out the numbers from you, I'm pretty familiar with them. You know, the fire department does about well over 5,000 emergency runs a year. 78% of our run volume is EMS, so we'll call that 3,300. It's a lion's share of what we do in terms of emergency response, but it's also critical. And you know, this fire department's won awards for its EMS care,
right? And
it's something that we're proud of, and not only for the residents but for the staff. I mean, this gives them a higher level of protection. You know, these guys have been working under the COVID issues since probably February that we know of, and we've been very lucky. But, you know, but it's dedicated staff. They're doing what they're supposed to do. The officer groups are maintaining the position of the department, trying to make sure that we're keeping our guys safe. This just enhances that. And it enhances it for the citizens as well.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Thank you, Chief. Anyone else? Mr. Bonzo?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. So one, I would love to, when we know these things are coming, if we could just, even if we get an email at noon that day, I'd love to know about these ordinances before coming here to the meeting. So just as a point of clarity for whoever needs to know that, because I did not know what it was. However, hearing the fire chief, knowing what we can use the COVID funds for, it's an ingenious use of it. So because it's going to be, as Mr. DiNardo said, it's going to be a very, it's something that we'll already need to buy in coming years, but we'll get it now. So I do support the ordinance and happy that we're going to be getting this. It'd be good to get it just earlier, just so I could have called or asked questions and what have you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Anyone else? Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
We have a motion by Mr. DiNardo, second by Mr. Gabbard. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. May we have all 3 readings, Mrs. Williams?
Ordinance authorizing the mayor or safety service director to purchase an ambulance with an upgraded patient care compartment with air filtration and sterilization capabilities necessary to mitigate exposure of coronavirus and other airborne diseases and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the mayor or safety service director to purchase an ambulance with an upgraded patient care compartment with air filtration and sterilization capabilities necessary to mitigate exposure of coronavirus and other airborne diseases and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the mayor or safety service director to purchase an ambulance with an upgraded patient care compartment with air filtration and sterilization capabilities necessary to mitigate exposure of coronavirus and other airborne diseases and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. May I have a motion, please? Mr. Bonzo?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we approve the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonzo to approve the ordinance. Mr. Thompson?
Second.
Second by Mr. Thompson. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Moving on to item L9. Ordinance authorizing mayor or, Ordinance making a special exemption for all full-time, unclassified, appointed employees with more than 4 years of continuous service to the city of Norwood for unused sick leave benefits. Mr. Bonzo?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we have all three readings of this ordinance tonight.
Motion by Mr. Bonzo to have all three readings. Mr. DiNardo? Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Mr. Bonzo?
Thank you, Mr. President. So the reason why I made the motion of all three readings, this is now going to be the third regular council meeting that we've had discuss this topic, plus we've had the committee of the whole meeting. It does take all of us to vote for it, but it just gets it off our plate and gets it done. We know this is preferred by the mayor, and also just remember, we can still, a person can still vote for this ordinance, to vote to do the readings, and then vote against the ordinance, just so that, we can move on. It's just acknowledging that, look, I think we've beat this thing to death at this point. We've got a good ordinance here, we can get it done with and move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. We have all three readings.
Ordinance making a special exception for all full-time unclassified appointed employees with more than 4 years of continuous service to the city of Norwood for unused sick leave benefits. Ordinance making a special exception for all full-time unclassified appointed employees with more than 4 years of continuous service to the city of Norwood for unused sick leave benefits. Ordinance making a special exception for all full-time unclassified appointed employees with more than 4 years of continuous service to the city of Norwood for unused sick leave benefits.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bonzo?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonzo. May I have a second? Mr. DiNardo? Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item M, administrative reports. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I will be brief. Couple of things. One is there, later on, I'll steal the Safety Service Director's thunder. Later on, he has a letter, and hopefully you can receive and file it as I've read. Preliminary construction schedule for the cathedral in Shanmore. So street repaving will start towards the end of this week, towards the end of the month. They will start on Shanmore and Cathedral. They'll be doing, the first, there's a process to this where they come out and do the planing, which is where they do the grind off a level. They put on an intermediate course, which is a leveling course. Then they start doing ADA ramps. They do some full depth restoration if they need to. They'll do some small curb replacements. They are not doing full curb replacements. This is not a complete restoration of all surfaces. This is improving the driving surface. And then the asphalt surface should be on there by November. We should have fresh, clean asphalt on all of those, both of those streets. The paving that is going to be completed on Indian Mound, Sheridan, Wakefield up there, that is a different monster. It's a much larger project. It is still on track to be approved and hopefully get started on it this year. So we'll see. We are still working to move forward on that. The Financial Recovery Commission meets tomorrow. The president and I will be at the meeting tomorrow during the day, going through the finances. We continue that process. We continue to work to get out from under control of that. The Elm Avenue drainage, there was a meeting recently with MSD, with the city engineers, and with the city administration, and it did not go well. The challenges there are that where does that water go when it leaves Norwood? And how much money is it going to cost if it's going to stay in Norwood? And where can that funding come from? MSD recognizes that there's a problem there, but I'm not so sure they're going to work with us very much on it. They haven't did a lot of cooperation with us so far. And it's not all their fault. I mean, been an existing problem that's been there for years and years. They have other things that they're working on. But we've got to really look at how we are going to make a change there. And it's going to be something that we are going to have to really push forward. So there will be more discussion about that later on what are some of the options that our city engineering comes up with that could work. But it's still something that I think everybody left the meeting a little bit disheartened that it didn't go the direction that we had hoped it would. The Board of Health, I wanted to talk about the Board of Health, and I'll just hit on two different things. One is the Board of Health meeting. The recent Board of Health meeting was really eye-opening to me to see the Board of Health and the planning that they do. They're talking about not only the COVID vaccines and how they will be administered, and really, they're already started making plans on the COVID vaccine. They were talking about the H1N1 vaccinations that they did years ago and how they administered those. They're also talking about the flu shots that are starting and that they will be putting out through there. So the Board of Health is sort of that, they're that group that you really don't hear a lot about, but when you sit in on a meeting, you understand how much they bring to our community when it comes to health and safety of our community. They really are making some great strides there. Brian Williamson, as our health commissioner, is doing a great job. He's taken that leadership role on, and he's moving that group forward. Gina Croft, who's our nurse working in there, working with all the school nurses and working with the nursing aides and working with the health clinics and all the different things. And they are just really an asset to our community. And if you go to a Board of Health meeting or if you stop by and talk to them, you find out pretty quickly. We've got some Board of Health members like Kathy Hammond and Jesse Lane and Debbie Newton, and I'm sure there's a couple that I'm missing, but all of them really have a good understanding of what it takes to keep the city healthy. And they've done so much good work over the years that we sort of take for granted. So if you've talked to any of the Board of Health people, there are some really great people that are there doing some good work. And then I'll wrap up by talking about volunteer service in the community. There are many people, and I've already received some letters from different people and some emails from different people talking about their neighbors who are doing great things in the city. And a great thing could just be, they get up every morning and go walk through their neighborhood and pick up trash. And they're the first person when somebody, the person down the street is sick to stop by and say, how can I help? Those are great community members, and I love hearing the stories of those people. We've got a child that's been putting out a COVID newsletter in one of the communities. So there are some great things going on. Please send me some information if you see that. I'll put together, a letter of commendation, something from the mayor's office, something from the city, just thanking them for that. The last thing I'll talk about is the bulk purchasing and the purchasing that we connected up with Hamilton County to do bulk purchasing. So we've cleaned up City Hall. We've gotten a lot of things out of City Hall on the internet website, getting rid of stuff. But here's one of the benefits that I think is incredibly important. Last year, we paid $95.95 per ton for salt, last year. This year, our price for salt is $58.87. And you could say, well, there's there's more salt, whatever. I know that there's a direct correlation between us working and collaborating with other communities and with the county to try to save money. So that is definitely beneficial. And then the last part I'll say is that Clint Zimmerman just finished up his bachelor's degree. So a guy who's worked for the city for over 20 years, has raised his family, he's got some great kids, beautiful wife, and he's been working the whole time to get his bachelor's degree. I can't, it puts bumps up my spine knowing that Clint has done so much in his life, and he is such an inspiration for not just his kids, but for other adults around. So that's what I'll end with. I should end with Waterworks Pool's about to close. We've had one of the best Waterworks pool seasons. We've had some of the best staff down there. Tanya Woodruff has done a really great job at keeping that pool running, keeping things in order. And then the staff, the managers that they've had and the staff, they've done a great job. I'm just, can't speak highly enough about our pool staff this year, our swimming pool. They did a great job.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Anyone have any questions? Mr. Bonzel?
Yeah, thank you so much. So just wanted to address Elm Avenue Sewer MSD thing. I guess I'm confused. Isn't the solution from 2003, or the proposed solution, isn't that to put some kind of a retention basin in? So it is, I guess I don't understand why they're concerned about the water, because right now, the city of Norwood, like Elm Avenue, those houses, they're being used as a retention basin right now. And so basically putting another one, like putting an actual retention basin in, that's not people's basements, that's not Elm Avenue. I guess it's the same amount of water leaving the city. It's doing exactly what it is today. It's just leaving slower than the capacity would allow it if it were to all leave when it rained, right? Like if we could get rid of all of it as soon as it rains. So, and then the other part of this, I'd just say, I mean, I'd love to hear any of your thoughts on that. The other part is that, like, the MSD, these engineers are not the final say. I mean, you know, I think there's escalation that could happen to the MSD director, to the city manager in the city of Cincinnati, and then ultimately to the county commission. And I would love to help you with that if you need that, because I do not want to let MSD like walk all over this project. I think it's too important, and I think that there's got to be some compromises that can be made so that we can move that forward. So I just would invite you to reach out if I could be of assistance.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Anyone else? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Moving on to item N, unfinished business. Do we have any unfinished business? Mr. Thompson?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, you mentioned something about having leftover COVID money that we're going to have to send back. Is there, I don't know all the stipulations and stuff that are associated with finding things to spend that on, but I would hate to not take advantage of that money. Is there things we can get for the health department that they can use in their planning or anything? I mean, the ambulance is great, but knowing that you said there was $400,000 and we figured out how to spend 140 of it, I would like to take advantage of it if possible. So I know we got finite time.
Yeah, there's also, sorry, you asked it.
It's okay, to whomever.
There's also $100,000 of money that was already taken out of that pot to pay labor for the time that people weren't in the building and things like that, that we were able to classify. But I guess the question still remains, there's going to be money, so.
Mr. Mayor.
We have interdepartmental meeting, a meeting every Monday where we talk, and we've talked about just that. So department heads have submitted more requisitions. We are working and looking at other areas where we can take advantage of that funding that's there to try to help the city out. The health department absolutely is taking advantage of some of that stuff. The police department, fire department. Fire department has a couple of other things that they'd like to do. So we're doing our best to utilize that funding as much as we can. But it's hard when you throw $500,000, $600,000 at the city and say, you have to use it by this, the 10th or the 15th of the month. It's tough. We're scratching our heads finding some ways, but we'll utilize everything we can. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Any other unfinished business? Thank you. Then we'll move on to item O, new business. Any new business? Mr. Gabbard.
I'd like to place in the committee of a whole Adposure, the group that has the digital signs, so they can give us a little bit more in-depth presentation and also be able to answer the questions so we can hopefully move forward on that.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard.
And then I'd like to also place in the committee of a whole Tri-State Trails for them to give a presentation on potential trail ideas, bike and walking throughout our city, connecting Wasson Way, connecting the new playing card site, Waterworks Pool, a lot of connections there, but for them to come and give a presentation as well.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Anyone else? Mr. Dracy.
I want to thank Mr. Gabbard for placing that sign in the committee of the whole. I heard you guys speaking on it at the meeting the other night, and I'm glad that you're wanting to bring him in for a little, I guess, more detailed.
Yeah.
And, geez, old Pete's, it's been a long night. More detailed Presentation.
Information, yeah.
Because I know you guys were kind of discussing it a little bit, and I appreciate that they
Right.
bring it up, man.
Thank you, Mr. Racy. Anyone else? Mr. Kelch?
Thank you, Mr. President. So earlier in my committee report, I put out that the lender work's going on there is Fridays from 5 to 8 p.m. out in September. But it's also going to be Saturdays from 9 to 12 in the morning in October. I just wanted to clarify that and put that information out there for those at home that would like to know.
Any other new business? Thank you. Then we'll move on to item P, communications. Mr. Gabbard?
I'd like to, can we just have communication 1, 3, and 4 received and filed as of read, and only read number 2 since there was some read before?
Motion by Mr. Gabbard to receive and file as if read item
1, 3, and
3,
4.
and 4. May I have a second?
Sure, I mean,
Mr. DiNardo?
yeah.
Any discussion? Mr. Thompson?
I'm confused why you're asking us to do that.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Thompson?
Question,
Mr.
Mr. Gabbard.
Gabbard?
He'd already, I mean, they're just the basic communications, and then the one is an actual letter that was actually written to the clerk. And since there was ones read before, and this one was actually sent to the clerk, I thought that would be appropriate, that should probably be read. The other ones are just housekeeping kind of communication.
Mr. Thompson? Mr. Bonzo?
So I guess I'm just curious, like, so if people send, because I mean, like I said, I've got plenty of letters that we could read about murals. So if people send a letter to the clerk of council, we're gonna read it, we're gonna have it on as a communication to read every time?
Mr. Gabbard?
To be honest, I was more than willing to put all the communications as of read, but since there was some read earlier today, and this person actually, sent it that way, and it was in our packet, it wasn't added, it was already in the packet. That's the only reason I'm asking.
No, I hear you. I mean, it just seems to me if we're gonna just receive and file with, as if read, we just do it for all of them. But I mean, it's fine, because I mean, I've read the letter. I think most of us read the letter already, but I think it's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo.
I'm okay amending it to all 4 if there's anyone that feels that they'd be cheated or something, but,
Mr. DiNardo, you wanted to amend it to?
yeah, I'm asking you, all 4.
Um,
Okay, that's, yeah.
I'll second that. I'll second
Cool.
that.
Yep, let's just leave it. I don't want to pressure it.
Okay. Any other discussion? Please call the roll.
So to be clear, the motion currently is to receive and file as read
As if read.
items 1, 3, and 4. Okay.
Yes, please.
All right. Mr. Bunzel?
No.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
No.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Mr. Bonzo.
I voted no.
No, okay. All
Got
me-
2 noes, 4 yeses.
All members present, we have 4 ayes, 2 noes. Motion passes. That takes us on to item P2, the letter.
Bear with me. Okay, to members of Norwood City Council, dated September 9th, 2020, murals in the city. Dear members of council, I'm writing in opposition to the council considering changing an ordinance prohibiting murals within the city. The current ordinance prohibits murals is in place because of reasons prior city administrations felt were pertinent and in the city's best interest, as well as the best interest of the residents. Perhaps if the proponents of murals, who seem to be mainly younger residents or newer residents, were to have asked residents who have been here a long time why the ordinance was in place, we would not be here today. First, let me state that I enjoy the murals that Artworks does downtown Cincinnati. There are large expanses of brick and concrete in the downtown Cincinnati area that are conducive to mural art. The murals provide color and vibrancies where there are not opportunities to plant trees and containers of plants. Downtown Cincinnati is also not a residential area per se, so the likelihood of offending one's neighbors is minimal at best. And there is the fact that professionally done murals, such as the ones installed by Artworks, are prohibitively expensive for most. However, the ordinances being considered by this council do not take these caveats into consideration. We have certain ordinances on the books, not to solely squelch creativity, but to keep peace between neighbors in a densely populated area. What your neighbor does to their property does affect your peace of mind, your property value, and if you so choose, your ability to sell your house. The fact that the city cannot dictate the content of murals due to the First Amendment considerations as decided by the courts means that allowing murals opens up a proverbial can of worms, possibly pitting neighbor against neighbor. Even the discussion of this topic has sadly resulted in mudslinging and name-calling on Norwood's social media. Allowing murals presents the real possibility that someone will push the envelope and paint something offensive on their property. For instance, how many of you would like to see a permanent Confederate flag or something a good number of people find offensive in your face every day? And what is offensive to one person may not be to another. It would be within the realm of possibility that murals could be used to harass, intimidate, or denigrate a resident or group of residents in a neighborhood, despite reassurances from the pro-mural contingent, because again, the city cannot, by law, dictate mural content. Even the largely toothless proposed mural board would not be able to dictate what murals cannot be painted in the city. Try selling your home with a large offensive mural visible from your home. It does not take long for a painted surface to look worn and tired. What steps would be taken to ensure the public that murals would be properly maintained? What happens when a person who has painted a mural moves? Would the mural be ordered painted over? What happens if a mural is vandalized? Who is responsible to fix it? Because that costs money. And what is the time frame? We all know that getting property owners to comply with city ordinances is hard enough as it is, often involving the courts and lost city employee hours. Do we really want to burden an already overworked building department with enforcement of murals? In a densely populated area, such as Norwood, peace between neighbors should be foremost in council and the administration's minds when considering the passage of any ordinance. Also, the fact that some residents wish to paint murals on historically relevant city property, such as the community center and the old safety lane, is alarming to me as well. Once those buildings are painted, it cannot be undone without huge expense to the city. In fact, no city buildings should be defaced by murals, because then the city is obligated to maintain and repair them. Imagine a teen tagger adding their 2 cents to a mural via spray paint can. Does the city have the wherewithal to pull public works workers from grass cutting, dragging fields, and snow plowing to fix a mural on city property? Is that an appropriate expenditure of taxpayer or city worker time? I believe it is not. Proponents of the murals want us to believe that Norwood deserves the best. Yes, our city does. That would be in the form of ordinances aimed at increasing the tree canopy of the city, or better parks and streets, for example. To quote another anti-muralist, you don't see them in vibrant and successful communities, but rather in more downtrodden places, a symbol, to me, of towns that have turned to their last resorts, a cheap injection of color or change in places where industry and commerce have left. I, for one, am not ready to write off as downtrodden. We, more permanent and longtime Norwood residents, as well as our parents and grandparents before us, have had existing ordinances passed in order to improve the aesthetics and livability of our city, because we already do want the best for our city. If one really feels that Norwood deserves the best, then walk the walk and pick up litter, volunteer to paint playground equipment, weed your sidewalks and curbs, plant trees and flowers, and maintain your property, as many of us have done for decades already. But murals, an emphatic no. It is my hope that council will thoughtfully listen to all of their constituents despite any possible attempts at influence by friends and family members. Thank you for your time. Sincerely, Renee Dierker, 4110 Floral Avenue.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams.
I think we've already voted to receive and file it, right? We just asked
No.
it to be.
Not this one.
Not this one, we did the other three. Mr. Gabbard?
Motion to receive and file.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. May I have a second? Mr. Geraci? Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci? Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Brings us to item Q, excuse absent members. Mr. Bonzel.
I move we excuse the absent member.
Motion by Mr. Bonzel to excuse absent members. May I have a second? Mr. Thompson.
Second.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Tara, bear with me, let me catch up with you. Who was the first and second?
Second, I'm sorry, motion by Mr. Bonzel, second by Mr. Thompson.
Thank you. Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yeah.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Item R, adjournment. Mr. Bonzel.
Move we adjourn.
Motion by Mr. Bonzel. I have a second. Mr. Thompson,
Second.
please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Thompson?
All members present voting aye, we're adjourned.